Abigail Carter did not cry when the entire town laughed at her. She had promised herself she would not give them that. But when the wagon driver dropped her suitcase in the dirt without a word, when the children pointed and the women covered their mouths, when the man she was supposed to marry looked at her across that dusty platform with cold blue eyes that said, "You are not what I expected," Abigail's hands shook. And she lifted her own suitcase. Because nobody else was going to. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday. Nathan Cole read it twice, standing at his kitchen table with his coffee going cold beside him, the words refusing to arrange themselves into anything that made sense. Your bride arrives. Willow Creek Depot. Thursday, 2 o'clock. He had not sent for a bride. He had not asked anyone for anything in 4 years. Nathan set the telegram down on the table, walked to the window, and looked out at the land that had been in his family for 3 generations. Rolling grass, the river cutting silver through the south pasture, cattle moving slow and steady in the distance. His land, his responsibility, the only thing left in the world he trusted. He picked up the telegram again. Your bride arrives, Willow Creek Depot. Thursday, 2 o'clock. He crumpled it, threw it in the fire, watched it burn. Then he went to find his foreman. Hector Ruiz had worked the coal ranch for 11 years. He was a compact, weathered man of 50 with a gray mustache and the kind of eyes that had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by most of it. When Nathan found him at the fence line, Hector took one look at his employer's face and set down his tools. What happened? Someone sent me a telegram about a bride. Hector was quiet for a moment. You order one? No. Harrison. Nathan did not answer. He didn't need to. Victor Harrison's name had been the answer to every bad thing that had happened in Willow Creek for the past 3 years. The man owned the bank, the freight contracts, 2 of the town council seats, and the patience of a man who was accustomed to getting what he wanted by waiting everyone else out. What Victor Harrison wanted was the coal ranch, specifically the river. The river that cut through Nathan's south pasture was the only reliable water source for 20 miles in any direction. Whoever controlled that river controlled every cattle operation, every farm, every family trying to build something in that valley. Nathan knew it. Harrison knew it. The entire territory knew it. And Nathan had refused to sell, 3 times. You gonna go to the depot? Hector asked. I don't know what I'm going to do. Because if Harrison arranged it, Hector said carefully, then whoever's on that train is either in on it or she's bait. Nathan stared at the fence line. Either way, I'm not marrying a stranger. No, Hector agreed. But you might want to at least see what he sent. Thursday came hot and windless, the kind of August afternoon that made Willow Creek feel like the inside of a cast-iron skillet. Nathan rode into town alone, hitched his horse outside the depot, and leaned against the post with his arms crossed and his hat pulled low, watching the platform fill up with people who had no business being at a 2 o'clock train arrival. That was the first thing that told him Harrison had been talking. There were 20, maybe 25 people gathered. Women from the church auxiliary, men from the saloon, the telegraph operator, 3 of the merchant families. Even the school teacher was there, standing to one side with her hands folded, wearing an expression of prim, anticipatory curiosity that Nathan found deeply irritating. They were there to watch. He kept his face still and waited. The train came in at 2:15, screaming steam and grinding to a halt in a great cloud of dust and noise. The platform conductor called the stop. Passengers began to step down, a traveling salesman with 2 cases, an older couple moving slowly, a young man in a new suit who looked like he'd never been west of Kansas City. And then the car door opened again, and Abigail Carter stepped onto the platform. Nathan had been prepared for many things. He had prepared himself for a woman who was part of Harrison's scheme, sharp-eyed, calculating, sent to spy or seduce or manipulate. He had prepared himself for someone desperate, someone running from something, someone who would see his ranch as a means to an end. He had prepared himself for awkward, for ordinary, for wrong, in a dozen different practical ways. He had not prepared himself for what he saw. She was young, mid-20s, he guessed. Her face was genuinely pretty, with warm brown eyes and dark chestnut hair, pinned up under a travel-worn bonnet. Soft features that might have belonged to a portrait in a parlor back east. She was wearing a green prairie dress that had been carefully pressed probably that morning on the train, probably because she had wanted to make a good impression. She was also unmistakably a large woman. Heavy through the shoulders and hips, full through the waist, the kind of size that the dress could not conceal, and that she clearly was not trying to conceal. She carried herself upright, chin level, hand gripping a battered brown suitcase that looked like it had traveled 1,000 miles and been set down hard 100 times. She stepped onto the platform and looked for someone meeting her. The laughter started almost immediately. It began as murmuring whispers that passed between the women, the suppressed smiles of the men who thought they were being subtle. Then someone Nathan never identified who said something just loud enough to carry. "Lord Almighty, that's what came on the train." The woman nearest the speaker covered a laugh with her hand. Another man outright chuckled. The school teacher pressed her lips together and looked away, which was its own kind of cruelty. Abigail heard it. Nathan could see the exact moment she heard it, the way her chin came up a fraction of an inch higher, the way her grip on the suitcase handle tightened until her knuckles changed color. She did not look at the people laughing. She kept scanning the platform with those brown eyes, looking for the man whose name was on the contract in her bag. She was not going to let them see her flinch. That single act of will, that refusal to collapse under the weight of other people's cruelty, while her hands were clearly shaking, was the thing that made Nathan push off the post and walk toward her. He crossed the platform with his hat pulled low and his expression closed, the way he always moved through town, and the crowd parted for him, the way crowds always parted for Nathan Cole. He was a tall man, broad through the chest, the kind of physical presence that didn't need to announce itself. He stopped in front of her. She looked up at him. She had to look up. He had a head on her, and something moved behind her eyes. Not hope. It was too cautious to be hope. More like the calculation of someone who had learned the hard way to measure every situation before committing to an emotion. "Mr. Cole," she said. Her voice was steady. He gave her credit for that. "Miss Carter," he said. He looked at the papers she was already pulling from her bag. He could see the familiar shape of a marriage contract, the formal header, the lines of careful legal language. He took them, read them, read them again. The contract was a forgery. Not an obvious one. Harrison had spent money on it, used real legal terminology, even included a notary seal that looked legitimate at first glance. But Nathan had seen enough contracts in his life to recognize when the language was slightly wrong, when the dates didn't quite line up, when a document was constructed rather than executed. He folded the papers and held them at his side. "Miss Carter," he said, "this marriage was never requested by me." The words landed the way he knew they would. He watched her absorb them, the small controlled tightening around her eyes, the breath she pulled in slowly and let out even slower, the way she processed the information without allowing her face to become a spectacle for the people watching. "I understand," she said. She reached for the contract. He gave it back to her. She tucked it into her bag. "I will leave," she said. "I apologize for the inconvenience." She bent and picked up her suitcase, and Nathan looked at the road beyond the depot, empty, blazing, stretching out into nothing in both directions. The next stage wouldn't come through for 4 days. The nearest town with a hotel was 30 miles east. She had no horse and what appeared to be approximately $12 worth of luggage. He also looked at the platform full of people who were still watching, still waiting to see what happened next, still deciding what kind of story this would be. If he walked away, he handed Harrison exactly what the man wanted: a piece of public theater that would be talked about in every saloon and sitting room in the territory. The Cole rancher rejected his own mail-order bride right there on the platform. Heartless man. No wonder he can't keep that ranch. And he left a woman alone in the street. He lifted her suitcase out of her hand. She looked at him sharply. "What are you doing?" "Getting this," he said, "because it looks heavy and the wagon is 20 yards away." "Mr. Cole?" "I'm not your husband." he said. He kept walking. But you're still a person, and I'm not leaving you on that platform to be entertainment. He heard the murmuring behind him shift recalibrate. He didn't care about any of it. He loaded her suitcase into the wagon bed, climbed up to the driver's seat, and waited. After a moment, Abigail Carter climbed up beside him. She did not say thank you. He did not expect her to. She sat with her back straight, and her hands folded in her lap, and her eyes on the road ahead, and Nathan flicked the reins and took them out of Willow Creek without looking back. They rode in silence for almost a mile before she spoke. "I didn't know it was a forgery," she said. "I know. I came from St. Louis. I answered an advertisement that said a rancher in Montana was looking for a wife. It was published in 3 papers. She paused. The agency was paid. The transportation was arranged. Everything appeared legitimate. "It was arranged by a man named Victor Harrison," Nathan said. "He wants my land. He's been trying to force me out for 3 years. Another pause. "And sending you an unsuitable bride was his latest method." The word landed between them, unsuitable, and Nathan heard it the way she must have meant it. Not as an accusation of her person, but as a cold description of Harrison's strategy. Harrison had sent her because he believed Nathan would be publicly humiliated by her arrival. He had sent her because he assumed Nathan Cole was the kind of man who cared about what Willow Creek thought, who would crumble under the pressure of collective mockery. He had read Nathan completely wrong, but he had also put this woman, this stranger, in the middle of something that had nothing to do with her and used her as a weapon and not told her she was one. "Miss Carter," Nathan said, "I'm going to take you to the ranch. You'll have your own room. You'll be safe. In 4 days when the stage comes back through, I'll pay your fare to wherever you want to go." She was quiet for a long moment. "And what do I do for 4 days?" she asked. "Whatever you like. The ranch has a library. Some of it's decent." She almost smiled. He caught it in his peripheral vision. The small flicker at the corner of her mouth quickly controlled. "That's a generous offer from a man who doesn't know me." "It's a practical offer from a man who doesn't leave people stranded in the street." The almost smile disappeared. She looked out at the grassland passing on either side of them. "I'm not a scheme," she said quietly. "I want you to know that. Whatever that man arranged, I was not part of it." "I know," Nathan said again. "You believe me very quickly for a man who was just deceived. You had 12 seconds on that platform to decide whether to let a crowd of strangers see you cry," he said. "You decided no. People running a scheme don't make that choice. They use the tears." She turned and looked at him directly for the first time. He kept his eyes on the road, but he felt the weight of her gaze measuring careful reassessing. "You noticed that," she said. "I notice most things." She turned back to the road. Neither of them spoke again for a while. The Cole Ranch sat at the end of a long drive back from the road behind a stand of cottonwood trees that in another season would provide decent shade. The house was large enough for a family built by Nathan's father with the assumption that there would be one. The barn was solid. The fencing was maintained. The cattle were visible in the east pasture moving slow and settled in the late afternoon heat. From the outside it looked like a working operation in reasonable health. Abigail would discover the truth of it in stages. Hector was waiting in the yard when they pulled up. He looked at Nathan. He looked at Abigail. He pulled off his hat. "Ma'am." "This is Hector Ruiz," Nathan said. "He runs the ranch hands. Miss Carter will be staying for a few days. She'll have the east room." "Yes, sir." Hector's face betrayed nothing, which meant he was thinking a great deal. "I'll get the room aired." Nathan helped Abigail down from the wagon, not because she needed it, but because the step was uneven, and he had seen 2 people nearly break an ankle on it, and carried her suitcase to the porch while she looked around the yard with those careful brown eyes taking inventory. "It's a good size," she said. "It was bigger when there were more people running it." He left her in the east room and went to find Hector. "She looks honest," Hector said once they were far enough from the house. "She is honest." Nathan leaned against the fence rail. Harrison used her. She didn't know. "And now? She stays 4 days, takes the stage. That's the end of it." Hector turned a piece of dry grass between his fingers. The books are still a wreck. Weston left them in a state. I know. And the kitchen. I know, Hector. I'm just saying, 4 days is 4 days. Hector settled his hat. Might as well use the time. Nathan said nothing. That evening, Nathan came in from the south pasture at sundown to find the kitchen, which had been a cold, disordered room that he used primarily to make coffee, and occasionally heat beans, producing a smell that stopped him in the doorway. Abigail was at the stove. She had tied her hair back and rolled up her sleeves and found an apron that had been hanging untouched on its hook for 4 years, and she was cooking. Not heating. Cooking, moving between the stove and the work table with the focused efficiency of someone who knew what she was doing, who understood the rhythm of a kitchen the way some people understand horses or mathematics. She looked up when he appeared. I found sufficient supplies, she said. It was neither apologetic nor triumphant, simply factual. I hope you don't object. Nathan sat down at the kitchen table without taking his hat off. What is it? Beef stew, cornbread. I found dried apples in the pantry. They're still good, so there's a cobbler for after if you want it. She turned back to the stove. I didn't know when you ate, so I kept everything warm. He sat at the table that had been his family's and watched a stranger move through his kitchen like she had done it 100 times before and did not know what to say. You didn't have to do this, he said. You gave me a room and a ride, she said. You're getting supper. That's fair. She set a bowl in front of him, thick broth, real vegetables, meat that had been tended and not simply boiled. She put cornbread beside it, still hot, and poured him coffee without asking, and then served her own bowl and sat across the table from him in the chair that had been his mother's, and began to eat as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. Nathan ate. I was halfway through the bowl before he understood what it was about the smell, the warmth, the sound of someone moving in the kitchen. It was the physical substance of something he had been doing without. For so long, he had stopped knowing he was hungry for it. A home. The feeling of a house being inhabited by more than one person. He kept eating and said nothing. When she refilled his coffee without being asked, he looked at her. Where did you learn to cook like this? My mother, she said. And necessity. We had a farm in Missouri. You learn to cook when there are people counting on you to do it. She broke a piece of cornbread. I also learned accounting from my father. He kept the farm books until his eyesight went. You kept them for 6 years. She said it without pride or complaint, the same way she said everything straight. It was either that or the farm fell apart. Nathan wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. And the marriage agency. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. I am 25 years old. I have been on 2 farms my entire life. I wanted... She stopped, reconsidered. The advertisement said a man needed a capable wife for a working ranch. It said he valued competence over convention. It seemed like an honest offer. Harrison wrote that advertisement, Nathan said. Yes. Her voice was even. He appears to have understood what I was looking for and used it against me. The anger in that sentence was controlled, but it was real. Nathan could hear the steel underneath the steadiness, the exact kind of quiet fury that comes from being manipulated by someone who took the time to understand you first. I'm sorry, Nathan said. That wasn't... He stopped. He was not a man who apologized often, and he was discovering he did not know how to do it smoothly. That wasn't right. She looked at him across the table. No, she said. It wasn't. But you're not the one who did it. She stood and began clearing the dishes, and Nathan sat at his table in the kitchen that smelled like a real meal for the first time in 4 years, and thought about all the things he should say, and found he didn't have words for any of them. What he had instead was the quiet certainty, unreasonable probably, and he knew it, that the woman Harrison had sent to destroy him was something else entirely. He just didn't know what to do about that yet. He found her the next morning in his office. Not going through his things, she was standing in the doorway, looking at the disaster on his desk, with the expression of a person who has just walked into a room where a slow catastrophe has been occurring for some time. May I? She asked. Nathan looked at the desk. 3 years of account books in various states of disarray, 2 ledgers he'd stopped being able to follow, 8 months in a stack of merchant receipts, a folder of freight contracts. He had been meaning to hire someone to sort it. He had been putting it off because he didn't trust anyone enough to let them see the numbers. "You're an accountant," he said. "I kept my family's books for 6 years," she said. "Same thing, smaller scale." She looked at him. "May I look?" He stepped aside. She went in. He came back 3 hours later and found her at the desk, with the ledgers spread open in front of her, a fresh piece of paper beside them, covered in her own neat figures. Her brow furrowed in the particular way of someone who has discovered something that does not add up. She looked up when he came in. "Mr. Cole," she said, "your ranch is not losing money because of poor management." "Then why is it losing money?" "Because you are being stolen from." She turned the ledger to face him and set her finger on a column of numbers. "These freight charges from Alderman and Sons, do you compare them to the contract rates?" "I have a contract with them." "Yes, and they are charging you between 15 and 20% above the contract rate on every single delivery. Have been for," she checked the dates, "at least 2 years." Nathan looked at the numbers, looked at the contract she had found in the folder and set beside the ledger for comparison. Looked at the gap between them, steady and consistent over 24 months of invoices. "That's significant," she said. "Yes." He looked at her. "How long would it take you to calculate the total?" "I've already done it." She slid the paper toward him. "Rounded to the nearest dollar, they owe you $462. Nathan stared at the number. $462. At a time when the ranch's margin was thin enough that he'd been considering selling the North herd. "Alderman," he said quietly. "Alderman's freight contracts are arranged through the Willow Creek Commerce Board," Abigail said. "Yes, I found 2 other vendors in your records with similar patterns, different amounts, same method." She looked at him steadily. "Mr. Cole, who runs the Commerce Board?" He already knew the answer. "Victor Harrison," he said. She nodded once. "I thought so." He stood in his own office, looking at the evidence that had been sitting in his files for 2 years, invisible to him, because he didn't have the patience for numbers available to her in 3 hours, because numbers were her native language, and felt something shift in the foundation of everything he had thought he understood about his situation. Harrison wasn't just trying to buy him out. He'd been draining him, slowly, methodically, using legitimate-looking invoices and the machinery of commerce, bleeding the ranch dry, while Nathan stood in his pastures watching his margins shrink and blaming himself for not being a better manager. "Miss Carter," he said. "Yes." "How long would it take you to go through everything?" She considered it. "The rest of the account books, 3 days, maybe 4, if some of the earlier records are in poor condition." She hesitated. "Which is approximately how long I'll be here." He looked at the ledger, at her notes, at the clear, careful handwriting that had just surfaced $462 he hadn't known he was owed. "What if I asked you to stay longer?" he said. She met his eyes. The measuring look was back, that careful, precise assessment of a woman who had learned the hard way not to commit to anything without understanding it first. "As what?" she asked. "As someone I employ," he said. "To help me understand what's been done to this ranch and how to fix it." "Not as your wife." "No." She was quiet for a long moment, looking at the ledger, and then at the window, and then at some middle distance between the two. "I would want to be paid," she said finally. "A fair wage, not charity." "Fair wage," he agreed. "Room and board included." Another pause, then, "Show me the rest of the records." He brought them in. She worked until after dark that first day, and the second, and the third. Nathan would come in from the fields and find her at the desk with lamps lit and her notes spreading across a growing second sheet, then a third, the columns of figures building into a picture of systematic, organized theft, so clean and careful that it was almost elegant, the work of a man who understood money at the same level Abigail did and had used that understanding to take what wasn't his. Hector brought her coffee in the evenings without being asked. On the third evening, Nathan came in to find her frowning at a particular freight contract, not the numbers, the language. "This clause," she said when she heard him come in. She didn't look up. This indemnity clause in the freight agreement. Is this the original language from your contract? He looked where she was pointing. I signed what they gave me. You signed what they gave you, she repeated, and there was something in her voice, not quite disbelief, not quite disappointment, more like the sound of a teacher who has just identified the root of a problem. Mr. Cole, this clause effectively gives Alderman and Sons the legal right to adjust rates based on, and I quote, prevailing market conditions at time of delivery without prior notification to you. Which means the overcharging was not technically theft, she said. They buried it in the contract language. They had the legal protection all along. She finally looked up at him. The question is whether the Commerce Board that approved this contract knew the clause was there. Harrison approved all the Commerce Board contracts. Then he didn't send me to destroy you from the outside, Abigail said. He had already been destroying you from the inside. I was meant to be the final blow. She set down the pen. A public embarrassment, a failed marriage, a reason for the town to lose respect for you. And then he would have offered to buy the ranch at whatever price he chose, because you would have been too diminished to refuse. Nathan sat in the chair across from the desk. His own chair, which she had commandeered so entirely that he'd been sitting in the guest chair for 3 days and had not thought to object. He looked at the stack of evidence she had built, methodical, documented, irrefutable. Can you write up what you found? He said. All of it, in a form that could be presented to a judge. She looked at him for a moment. Yes. That's what I need from you. She picked up the pen. Then that's what I'll do. He stood to go, got to the door, stopped. Miss Carter. Yes. He turned back. She was already bent over the ledger again, the lamplight catching the side of her face. Her expression settled into the focused calm of someone doing work they understand and are not afraid of. The stew was the best meal I've eaten in 4 years, he said. She didn't look up, but he saw it this time, the real version, not just the almost. A full, unguarded, quietly warm smile that she probably thought he couldn't see from the doorway. Get some sleep, Mr. Cole, she said. He went, and in the quiet of the office with the lamps burning and the night pressing against the windows, Abigail Carter kept working, building the case that would undo a corrupt man's 3-year plan in the house of the cowboy who had lifted her suitcase out of her hands and driven her away from a crowd that was still laughing. She had come to this territory to find a home. She had not expected to find a fight, but she was beginning to think, just beginning carefully, with all the caution of a woman who had been used as a weapon once already, that this fight might be worth having. The morning after Nathan found her smiling at the ledger, Abigail was already in the office before he came down for coffee. He heard her before he saw her. The scratch of pen on paper, steady and unhurried. The sound of someone who had woken with a purpose and gone straight to it without wasting time on the transition. He stood in the hallway for a moment, coffee cup in hand, and listened to that sound in his house, like a man hearing rain after a long drought, not certain what to make of it, not certain he wanted it to stop. He went in. She had reorganized the desk. Not dramatically, his things were still there, still accessible, but everything had been shifted into a logic. He could see immediately, papers grouped by vendor dates running left to right, the ledger open to a page she had flagged with a torn strip of brown paper. Her own notes were stacked to the left in a tidy pile held flat by the corner of an inkwell. There's coffee on the stove, she said without looking up. I have some. Good. She made a notation. I found something last night. He sat in the guest chair, his chair, the one she had occupied so completely for the past 3 days that it had become simply her chair, and he had stopped thinking of it as his own. Show me. She turned the ledger toward him. The freight overcharges. I've been treating them as the primary mechanism. But look at this. She set her finger on a column of figures in the left-hand ledger, older entries, the ones from Nathan's father's time, that Nathan had not touched in years because they were painful in a way he couldn't fully articulate. Your father's original water rights agreement, the one that was filed with the Territorial Land Office in 1871. Nathan set his coffee down. I know that agreement. Do you know there's a secondary clause in it, filed as an amendment in 1879? She pulled a paper from the left stack, a copy she had made herself, her handwriting, translating the cramped official script into something readable. An amendment that gives the Commerce Board the right to review water access agreements if the primary holder fails to maintain, and I'm reading directly here, adequate operational standards as determined by the board. Nathan stared at her. Harrison sits on this board, she said. He has for 6 years. Which means he has been engineering this situation from both ends, Abigail said. He overcharges your freight to drain your operational budget. Your operational numbers drop. Your ranch appears to be failing standard metrics. He uses the Water Rights Amendment to call for a board review, and in that review, he votes with whatever allies he has on the board that the coal ranch has failed to meet operational standards. She folded her hands on the desk. At which point the water rights revert to territorial jurisdiction and become available for reassignment to whoever applies for them, to whoever is positioned to apply for them. She held his gaze. He didn't want to buy your ranch, Mr. Cole. He wanted to take your water. The land was secondary. The cattle were secondary. He has been building a legal framework to strip your water rights in a way that would look entirely legitimate. The room was very quiet. Nathan had known Victor Harrison was dangerous. He had known the man was patient and methodical and willing to play a long game. What he had not fully grasped until this moment, with Abigail's careful reconstruction laid out in front of him, was the architecture of what had been built around him. How precisely each piece had been placed. How much of what he had believed to be ordinary misfortune had in fact been engineered. "How long?" Nathan said. His voice came out lower than he intended. Based on the dates in the amendment and the beginning of the overcharging pattern, he started planning this approximately 4 years ago. She paused. Shortly after your father died. He absorbed that. Victor Harrison had sat across from him at his father's funeral, shaken his hand, said the ordinary words of condolence, and already had a plan running. Nathan stood up from the chair, walked to the window, put his hand flat against the frame and looked out at the pasture where his cattle were moving slow in the early morning light, and felt something cold settle in his chest. Not panic, not grief exactly, but the particular sensation of a man who has just learned the ground he thought he was standing on was hollow beneath his feet. "The amendment filing," he said. "Can it be contested? On what grounds? That it was filed without the knowledge or consent of the landholder." "It was filed correctly with the territorial office," Abigail said. "The law doesn't require your consent for an amendment to a public water rights agreement. But," she picked up a different paper from the stack, "it does require notification. A formal notice delivered to the primary holder within 30 days of filing." Nathan turned from the window. "I never received a notice." "No," she said. "You didn't. I've been through every paper in this office going back 8 years. She held the paper out to him. "Which means either the notice was lost, or it was never sent, or it was intercepted." He crossed the room and took the paper from her. "Read it. Read it again." "If it was never sent," he said slowly, "then the amendment itself is procedurally defective," Abigail said. "It exists on the territorial record, but it cannot be legally enforced because the required notification was not completed." She looked at him steadily. "You would need a lawyer to argue that properly, but if the notification records at the land office show no delivery confirmation, which I suspect they do not, you have grounds to have the amendment struck." He was still holding the paper. "You found all of this," he said. "The numbers were already here," she said. "I just read them." "No," Nathan said. "That's not what I meant." He set the paper on the desk. "I've had a lawyer look at these files, 2 years ago. He didn't find the amendment." Abigail was quiet for a moment. "Who recommended the lawyer?" Nathan's jaw tightened. "The Commerce Board," he said. She nodded once slowly. "Then you see the shape of it." He did. He saw all of it now, the whole patient interlocking structure of it. Harrison's lawyer, Harrison's freight contracts, Harrison's Commerce Board, Harrison's amendment buried in a file that Nathan's own grief and discomfort had kept him from looking at too closely for 4 years. And Harrison's carefully placed advertisement run in 3 newspapers in Missouri, designed to find a woman who was desperate enough to take a chance and useful enough to be weaponized. Miss Carter, Nathan said. Yes. I owe you an apology. She looked up from the desk. Really looked at him, not the measuring look she used when she was assessing a situation, but something more direct. For what? For what he put you through to get at me. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful in the way of someone choosing words with precision. I appreciate that, she said. But I don't need your guilt, Mr. Cole. I need your trust. What I've found in these records, the overcharges, the amendment, the legal maneuvering, none of it does you any good unless you're willing to act on it. I'm willing. Then I need access to the original 1871 water rights filing. She held his gaze. The actual document not to copy. It should be at the Territorial Land Office in Helena. That's a 2-day ride. Yes, she said. He looked at her, at the stacks of paper she had organized, at the notes in her handwriting that had in 4 days done more to illuminate his situation than 4 years of trying to manage it alone. I'll send Hector tomorrow, he said. Thank you. She picked up her pen. And Mr. Cole? Yeah. When the stage comes through in 4 days, she said, not looking up, I won't be on it. He didn't say anything, but when he walked out of the office, he was walking slightly differently than he had walked in. Word got back to town. It always did. Nathan learned about it from Hector, who had gone in for supplies and come back with a tighter expression than usual, and a way of not quite meeting Nathan's eyes that meant he had information he wasn't sure how to deliver. Spit it out, Nathan said. People are talking about the woman, Hector said. About her staying. Let them talk. It's not... Hector pulled his hat off and turned it in his hands. Mrs. Whitmore at the dry goods says she's heard Miss Carter is some kind of she-said schemer. That Harrison is putting out word that she came here under false pretenses and is worming her way into the ranch. Nathan went very still. Harrison is saying that, he said. A version of it. The story going around is that she faked the marriage contract herself, that she fooled you, that she's after the ranch. Hector replaced his hat. Harrison's people have been in the saloon talking, multiple nights. Nathan thought about Abigail at the desk, the careful way she had documented every finding, the precision of her notation, the way she moved through financial records with the transparent methodology of someone who had nothing to hide, because accuracy was its own protection. He thought about what it would feel like to hear that story if she heard it. Does she know? He said. I don't think so. He found her in the kitchen, which she had claimed as thoroughly as she had claimed the office, not by taking it over, but by filling it with the kind of steady, purposeful activity that made a space feel used. She was making bread. Her sleeves were rolled up, and there was flour on her forearm, and she was working the dough with the focused physicality of someone who found it satisfying. And she looked up when Nathan came in with an expression that shifted immediately from open to guarded when she registered his face. What happened? She said. Harrison is talking in town, Nathan said. He's putting out a story that you engineered the marriage contract yourself. She went very still. Her hands stopped moving in the dough. That you're a schemer. After the ranch. He watched her face. I want you to hear it from me, not from somewhere else. She stood there for a moment with her hands in the dough and her eyes on the table. He could see her processing it, not with shock exactly, because she was not a woman who allowed herself the luxury of shock, but with a particular kind of controlled anger that manifested as absolute stillness. Of course he is, she said finally. Her voice was very quiet. Of course that's his next move. He's trying to discredit you before you can use what you've found. He doesn't know what I've found. He knows you've been in the office. Nathan pulled out a chair and sat down. He has people watching this place. Hector's seen riders on the North Ridge twice this week. Abigail pulled her hands out of the dough, wiped them on the apron, turned to face him fully. Then we don't have as much time as I thought, she said. How much do you need? To complete the documentation, another 4 days, maybe 5. She looked at him. To have something presentable to a judge, something that can't be dismissed. I need the original water rights document from Helena. I need notarized copies of the overcharge evidence, and I need to write the summary in a form that makes the pattern clear, even to someone who doesn't understand accounting. Hector left for Helena this morning. Good. She picked up the pen she'd left on the counter and made a note on the paper she apparently kept everywhere. She had been leaving pieces of paper with notes on them all over the house, the kitchen, the hallway, the office, as if her mind operated faster than her ability to get back to a single central location, and she needed to deposit thoughts wherever she happened to be standing. "Miss Carter," Nathan said. She looked up. "The people in town who are hearing Harrison's story," he said. "Some of them will believe it. Some of them will believe whatever is most convenient," she said. "That's not new. It means things may get harder before they get easier." She met his eyes. "Things have been hard my entire life, Mr. Cole. I know how to work in hard conditions." She turned back to her bread. "Are you asking me if I want to leave?" "I'm asking if you understand what staying means." She was quiet for a moment, her hands moving in the dough again. "I understand that a man has been robbing you for 4 years and is now trying to steal the water that 100 families in this valley depend on," she said. "I understand that I am the only person who has been able to read his method clearly enough to document it." She didn't look at him. "I understand that if I leave, that evidence goes with me. And he wins." She shaped the dough and set it to rise. "I'm staying," she said. He nodded, stood. "Then I'll make sure the north pasture gate is locked at night," he said. The first direct confrontation came 4 days later. Not from Harrison himself. The man was too careful for that, too practiced at working through intermediaries, but from 2 men. Nathan didn't recognize who appeared at the ranch gate on a Wednesday morning when Hector was in the east pasture and Nathan was in the barn. Abigail was in the yard. She had come out to bring water to the ranch hand mending fence near the gate, which was the only reason she was there when the 2 men rode up. They were large men, well dressed for the frontier, in a way that meant money had been spent on them, and they pulled up at the gate and looked at her with the particular assessment of men who have been told to expect a specific kind of person. "We're looking for Nathan Cole," the first one said. "He's on the property," Abigail said. She set the water bucket down. "What do you need?" The man looked at her in a way that moved from assessment to something more deliberately unpleasant. "You're the woman then, the one who's been going through the rancher's books." "I'm the person who manages the ranch accounts," she said. "What do you need?" "Mr. Harrison sends his regards," the second man said. He smiled, not a friendly smile, the kind that is meant to make clear the person smiling has the advantage. "And his advice. The books you've been working from, they're the property of the Cole-Harrison Commerce Agreement. You've been reviewing confidential business documents without authorization. That's a legal matter. The Cole-Harrison Commerce Agreement," Abigail said, "does not exist. The Cole Ranch has contracts with Harrison-affiliated vendors. Those contracts are the property of both parties. Mr. Cole has every right to review documents pertaining to his own financial agreements." The first man's smile faded slightly. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand." "I understand completely," she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were steady. The only thing she permitted herself was to stand very still, which she had learned was how you did not show a person that your heart was hammering in your ears. "You've been sent here to tell me that someone powerful is unhappy with my work, and to imply that there will be consequences. I have heard that before, and the answer is the same. I do the work I was engaged to do. If Mr. Harrison has a legal complaint, he's welcome to bring it to court." She picked up the water bucket. "Please tell him I said so." She walked away from them. She walked with her back straight, and her pace measured, not fast enough to look like flight, not slow enough to look like she was waiting to see what they would do. She walked to where the ranch hand was working and handed him the water, and stood there talking to him about the fence repair for a reasonable amount of time before looking back at the gate. The men were gone. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her skirt and waited for them to stop. Nathan found her 20 minutes later in the office writing. "Hector said 2 men came to the gate," he said. "Harrison's men. They claimed the documents I've been reviewing are confidential business property." She didn't look up. "I sent them away." "You?" He stopped. "By yourself." There was a ranch hand nearby. She made a notation. They weren't going to do anything violent in daylight at the property gate where they could be identified. They were there to intimidate. And she looked up then. Her eyes were steady. "And I am not easy to intimidate," she said. "I have been stared at and laughed at and spoken about as though I were not in the room my entire life. Two men on horses saying something that is legally incoherent are not, relatively speaking, my most difficult moment." He looked at her. "Miss Carter," he said, "when I brought you here from that platform, I thought I was doing you a favor by not leaving you stranded. You were. I think I may have brought you into something more dangerous than I intended." She held his gaze for a long, steady moment. "I think," she said carefully, "that I may have come into something more meaningful than I expected." She picked up her pen. "I would appreciate it if you had someone watch the gate at night." "Already arranged," he said. She nodded and went back to the ledger. He stood in the doorway of his office and watched her write, and thought, not for the first time, and with increasing clarity, that Victor Harrison had made the worst strategic mistake of his calculating life when he had put Abigail Carter on a train to Willow Creek. Hector came back from Helena on a Thursday, 2 days behind schedule, riding hard enough that Nathan knew before the man opened his mouth that something had changed. "The water rights document," Nathan said. He and Abigail were both in the yard when Hector came through the gate. "Did you get it?" Hector dismounted and handed over a leather document case without speaking. Nathan passed it directly to Abigail. She had it open in 15 seconds. Her eyes moved down the document fast and precise, and Nathan watched her face, watched the slight furrow that appeared between her brows deepened, then went still in the specific way he had come to associate with her discovering something significant. "What?" he said. "The 1879 amendment," she said. She turned the document toward him. "Look at the filing date." He looked. November 14th, 1879. "The amendment was filed 2 weeks after your father's death," she said, "while the ranch was in the process of transferring to you, during the exact window when no one was paying attention to the territorial filings." She looked at Hector. "Was there a notification record?" Hector shook his head. "I asked the land office clerk directly. He checked back 3 years on both sides of the date. No delivery confirmation. No notification record of any kind." Abigail closed the document case. "Then we have it," she said quietly. "Have what?" Nathan said. She looked at him. "The amendment is procedurally void. No notification means no valid filing, which means all of Harrison's legal maneuvering, the water rights review mechanism, the operational standards clause. The entire framework he built is built on a foundation that doesn't exist." She held the case against her chest. "He spent 4 years and considerable money and a great deal of careful planning on a scheme that has a fatal procedural flaw, and nobody in his entire operation caught it because nobody was reading the original documents carefully enough." The yard was quiet. "He almost got away with it," Nathan said. "He almost got away with it," she agreed. "If you had never asked for a mail-order bride, or rather, if he had never arranged for one to be sent, and if I had never arrived and stayed, and decided to be useful, and if you had never trusted me enough to let me into your office." She paused. "The review would have proceeded. The amendment would have been enforced. And by now, you would have been in a legal fight you couldn't win over rights that were being stolen using your own money to pay the lawyers." Hector looked between the two of them, said nothing, very carefully walked his horse toward the barn. Nathan looked at Abigail, at the document case she was holding, at the woman who had arrived on a train platform 12 days ago with a battered suitcase and enough controlled dignity to keep from crying in front of people who were laughing at her. "We need a lawyer," he said. "A real one, not one Harrison recommended." "I know one," she said. "In St. Louis. He handled my father's estate. He's honest and he's good." She finally let her arms drop. "I'll write to him today." The letter she wrote to the lawyer in St. Louis was 6 pages long. Nathan knew this because she left it on the hall table to be taken to the post with the outgoing mail, and he looked at it without intending to the sheer density of her handwriting across 6 sheets of paper, the ordered paragraphs, the references to specific document numbers, the clarity of the argument she was making. He did not read it. That would have been a violation of something he didn't have a name for yet, but recognized as important. He looked at the architecture of it, the way it was constructed, the way her mind had organized the information into something a stranger could read and understand, and then he set it back on the table. That evening, he came in from the south pasture to find her in the kitchen again, and for the first time in 12 days, she wasn't working. She was sitting at the table with a cup of tea. She had found tea somewhere in his pantry, a tin he hadn't known existed, probably purchased by someone who worked for his father, and she was just sitting. Not reading, not making notes, just sitting. He poured himself coffee and sat across from her. They were quiet for a while. It was, Nathan realized, a comfortable quiet. The kind that had developed gradually without announcement over 12 days of shared meals and near-constant purposeful activity. The kind that meant two people had stopped needing to fill the space between them with noise. "You're not working," he said. "I finished the summary document this afternoon," she said. "Everything is as complete as it can be until we hear from Samuel, the lawyer. Then you're done." "The documentation phase," she said. "Yes." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "What happens next is legal, and dangerous probably." "Probably," she agreed. "Harrison will not accept this quietly." "No," she said. "He won't." He looked at her. She was looking at the table, one hand wrapped around her cup, and there was something in her expression he hadn't seen before. Not the focused competence of the last 12 days. Not the controlled neutrality she deployed like armor in difficult situations, but something quieter and more personal, something closer to tired. "When did you last sleep properly?" he asked. She looked up. "Define properly." "More than 4 hours." She considered this with apparent seriousness. "Tuesday. Possibly Monday." "It's Thursday." "I know what day it is, Mr. Cole." "Nathan," he said. She looked at him. "We've been in this house together for almost 2 weeks," he said. "You've restructured my entire understanding of my own financial situation and probably saved my ranch. You can use my name." Something crossed her face, the same quick internal movement he had learned to watch for the things she did when she was assessing whether something was safe to accept. "Abigail," she said finally. He nodded, drank his coffee. Outside, a nightbird was calling from somewhere in the cottonwoods. Inside the house, the fire was settling in the hearth, and the tea was cooling, and Nathan Cole was sitting at the table that had belonged to his father, and his father before him, across from a woman who had arrived as a weapon aimed at everything he had, and was instead quietly and without ceremony, proving herself to be something he did not yet have a word for. She picked up her cup. "Your ranch hand, the young one Callum, he's been helping me carry the records in and out of the office," she said. "He's very loyal to you. He's been here 3 years. He told me about your father, when you weren't around." She looked at the cup. "He said your father was the most honest man he ever worked for." Nathan was quiet. "He said you're exactly like him," she said. "Except you forgot how to talk to people for a while." He looked across the table at her. "You're telling me this because, she said carefully, "it is possible to work so hard to protect something that you stop remembering what it felt like before you were just protecting it." She met his eyes. "Your father built this ranch. You've been defending it. Those are not the same thing." He held her gaze for a long moment. "No," he said. "They're not." She finished her tea, stood up. "Good night, Nathan," she said, and she walked down the hall to the east room, which had been a spare room, and was now quietly, and without negotiation, simply hers. Nathan sat at the table for a long time after she left. Outside, the night was wide and still over the Montana grassland. Inside, the house felt different than it had in years, occupied in a way that went beyond the presence of another person, inhabited in a way he was only beginning to understand. He didn't know what Abigail Carter was to him, but he was beginning to understand, with the same slow certainty with which she had read the truth out of his own account books, that whatever she was, it was not temporary. He stood, washed his cup, went to the window and looked out at his land, at the river catching moonlight in the south pasture, at the thing Victor Harrison had been trying to steal from him for 4 years. The document case with the original water rights filing was on the edge of the desk in the office. The summary Abigail had written was in the stack beside it. The letter to the lawyer in St. Louis was on the hall table ready for morning. The trap Harrison had spent 4 years building was coming apart at the seams. And in the east room, with the lamp burning low, a woman who had arrived with a battered suitcase and 12 days' worth of nothing was sleeping finally, after days of working to save a life she had only just walked into. Nathan turned from the window and went to bed. But for the first time in 4 years, he was not thinking about the ranch when he closed his eyes. The letter from Samuel Harding arrived on a Monday morning, 18 days after Abigail had sent it. Nathan was in the barn when Callum came running with it, and he took it straight to the office without opening it, setting it on the desk in front of Abigail, the same way he had learned to set everything important in front of her first, because she would see what he missed. She opened it with a letter knife, read it once fast, then again slow. "He's coming," she said. "When?" "2 weeks. He says the procedural defect in the amendment filing is, and I'm reading directly among the most clear-cut cases of statutory non-compliance he has encountered in 30 years of territorial law practice." She set the letter down. "He also says Harrison will know we've been to the land office the moment we file the contest. His contacts in Helena will tell him within days." "Then Harrison already knows," Nathan said. "Or will soon." "Yes." She folded the letter. "Which means whatever he's going to do next, he'll do it before Samuel arrives." Nathan looked at her. "What do you think he'll do?" She was quiet for a moment, in the way that meant she had already thought about it, and was deciding how to say it. "He has 2 options. The first is legal. He challenges our right to contest the amendment, tries to slow the process through court filings. That buys him time, but doesn't stop us, because the procedural defect is real and documented." She looked at Nathan directly. "The second option is not legal." "He sends men," Nathan said. "He sends men," she agreed. They looked at each other across the desk, and in the silence between them was the full weight of what they were both understanding, that they had moved past the phase of paperwork and into something more immediate, more physical, more dangerous. The desk and the ledgers and the careful documentation had felt like a kind of protection as long as the fight was on paper. Paper fought back on paper. What came next would not be paper. "I want you to move your things to the main room," Nathan said. She frowned. "Why?" "Because the east room has one window that faces the road, and I want you further from it." He said it flat and factual, the way he said most things, without apology or softening. "The main room is interior, better walls, farther from any entry point." She looked at him for a moment. "You're serious?" "I'm always serious about this kind of thing." She didn't argue. That more than anything told him she understood exactly how serious it was. She moved her things that afternoon. Callum helped her carry the small stack of belongings, the suitcase, the extra dress she'd acquired from the general store. The writing case she kept her personal papers in down the hall and into the main room, which was larger and darker and smelled of wood smoke and old leather, and something that Abigail was slowly realizing was simply the smell of Nathan Cole's life. His father's desk was in the corner. His mother's rocking chair was by the hearth. The family Bible was on the shelf beside the window, the names of the Cole family written inside the front cover in different hands across different decades. She stood in the middle of that room with her suitcase at her feet and looked at the family Bible and felt for the first time since she had stepped off the train in Willow Creek the full complexity of where she was and what she was doing. She was not his wife. She was not his employee in any formal sense. She was a woman who had arrived as a stranger and stayed as something that did not yet have a name, and she was now standing in the middle of his family's room with her things arranged in the corner, and outside somewhere in the direction of Willow Creek, a powerful and dangerous man was deciding what to do about her. Callum set the last box down and looked at her with the open, uncomplicated concern of a 20-year-old who had not yet learned to make his face unreadable. "You all right, Miss Carter?" "Yes," she said. "Thank you, Callum." He left. She stood there a moment longer, and then she picked up her writing case and went back to work, because that was what she did when things were difficult. She found the next task, and she did it. Harrison moved faster than either of them expected. It was not men with guns. Not yet. It was something Nathan had not anticipated, which made it more effective. A petition filed with the Willow Creek Town Council on a Wednesday morning, signed by 11 of the 14 council members, requesting that the town marshal conduct a formal inquiry into the financial records of the Cole Ranch, on the grounds that documents of commercial interest to multiple Willow Creek businesses had been reviewed by an unauthorized party. The marshal, a man named Orrin Dwyer, who had held the position for 7 years and whose continued appointment was reviewed annually by the Commerce Board, arrived at the ranch gate on Thursday at 9 in the morning. Nathan met him in the yard. Abigail stood on the porch. Dwyer was a compact, careful man who kept his expression professionally neutral, which Nathan had always found useful in reading him when something was making Dwyer uncomfortable. The neutrality got more pronounced, more deliberate. Right now, it was very pronounced. "Nathan," Dwyer said. "Orrin. I've got a council petition here. You've seen it, I expect. Hector brought me a copy last night." Dwyer looked at the porch, at Abigail, back at Nathan. "The council is asking me to take custody of the financial documents currently on the ranch property, pending a determination of ownership." "Those documents are the property of the Cole Ranch," Nathan said. "They have been in this office since before I was born. The petition argues that some of them fall under the Cole-Harrison commercial agreements and are therefore jointly held." "There is no Cole-Harrison commercial agreement," Abigail said from the porch. Dwyer looked at her again, more carefully this time. "Ma'am," he said, "the council petition specifically." "The council petition," Abigail said, stepping off the porch and walking into the yard with the same measured pace she had used when she walked away from Harrison's men at the gate, "was filed on behalf of Victor Harrison, who is attempting to prevent legal documentation of his own financial misconduct from being submitted to a court." She stopped 5 feet from Dwyer and held his gaze. "Marshal Dwyer, I am going to ask you a direct question, and I would like a direct answer." Dwyer blinked. "Ma'am, have you personally reviewed the commercial agreements between the Cole Ranch and Harrison-affiliated vendors?" "I'm not a financial." "Have you reviewed them?" she said again. Not aggressive, precise. The way she said everything with the absolute clarity of someone who knew exactly what they were asking and why. Dwyer was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "Then you do not know whether those documents fall under a joint commercial agreement, and you cannot lawfully claim custody of private property on the basis of a petition that makes a legal assertion you have not verified." She kept her eyes on him. "I have reviewed those agreements, every one of them, in full, and I am prepared to testify in any court in this territory that no joint ownership of these records exists." A pause. "I will also note for the record that the man who organized this petition has been systematically overcharging the Cole Ranch for a minimum of 2 years, using contract language designed to be invisible to anyone who was not specifically looking for it." The yard was very quiet. Dwyer stood between them with his hands at his sides and his expression doing something complicated underneath the professional neutrality. Nathan had known Orrin Dwyer for 15 years. He knew what that expression meant. It meant the man was running the numbers, not financial numbers, but the other kind. The ones that measured which side of a situation was going to be on the right side of history when the dust settled. "Nathan," Dwyer said carefully, "is what she's saying accurate about the overcharging?" "She has 4 account books, 2 ledgers, and 16 months of freight invoices that document it," Nathan said. "Yes." Another long pause. Dwyer looked at the council petition in his hand. Then he folded it. "I'll need some time to review the legal standing of this petition before I take any action," he said. "In the meantime, the documents remain on your property." He tipped his hat at Abigail. "Got back?" Nathan looked at Abigail. "You just talked the marshal out of a legal order," he said. "I talked the marshal into doing his job correctly," she said. "There's a difference." She turned back to the house. "But it won't hold. Harrison will file with a higher authority by Monday. We need Samuel here before that happens." Samuel Harding arrived on a Saturday 12 days ahead of schedule. He was a thin, precise man of 60 with wire spectacles and a way of moving that suggested he had spent his entire life in rooms full of paper and had achieved a deep peace with that fact. He shook Nathan's hand, briefly, shook Abigail's hand with slightly more warmth. They were old acquaintances, that much was clear, and then asked to see the documents. He spent 6 hours in the office. He came out with the expression of a man who has been handed everything he needs and knows exactly what to do with it. "We file Monday," he said. "In Helena. I'll ride with the documents personally." "Harrison will try to intercept," Nathan said. "I know." Samuel looked at Abigail. "You did excellent work." "I did the work that needed doing," she said. "You did the work that nobody else could do," Samuel said. "I've had cases like this before where the fraud was buried deep enough that it survived for years. What you've built here is airtight. The amendment is void. The overcharging is documented. The notification failure is confirmed." He looked at Nathan. "Victor Harrison is going to spend the next 2 years in court, and he is not going to win." Nathan was quiet for a moment. 2 years. These things take time. But the outcome? Samuel was not a man who made promises lightly, and what he said next was not a promise, but something adjacent to one. The outcome is not in doubt. That night, after Samuel had gone to the guest room that had been briefly Abigail's east room, Nathan and Abigail sat on the porch in the last of the evening light. They did not talk for a long time. The work that had sustained them, structured them, given them the framework for being in the same space together, was finished. What remained was the question neither of them had been able to approach while the work was happening. "What will you do?" Nathan asked. "After Samuel files, after this is resolved?" She thought about the question honestly, the way she thought about everything. "I don't know," she said. "I came here without a plan beyond the one that was arranged for me, and that plan was false." She turned her cup in her hands. "I have a skill that is useful. I can go somewhere and use it." "Or you could stay somewhere and use it," Nathan said. She looked at him. He looked back at her, and for once he did not look away, did not pull his eyes to the middle distance the way he usually did when something felt too direct. He held her gaze with the full, deliberate steadiness of a man who has spent 4 years alone and has only recently understood what that cost him. "The ranch accounts will still need managing," he said, "after all of this. I'm aware of that. And the kitchen hasn't been in this condition since before my father died. I know. And the East Room." He stopped. She waited. "The East Room has been empty for 4 years," he said. "It shouldn't be." She looked at him for a long moment, that careful measuring look that he had first seen on the train platform in Willow Creek. The look of a woman who had been disappointed often enough to require certainty before she allowed herself to hope. "Nathan," she said carefully, "what are you asking me?" "I'm asking if you want to stay," he said. "Not because I need an accountant, not because the kitchen needs someone in it." He turned the coffee cup in his hands, his own version of the same nervous gesture. She realized the thing they both did when they were working up to saying something that mattered. "Because this house has felt different since you came into it, and I don't want to go back to the way it felt before." The porch was quiet. The grassland beyond was settling into the early dark. "That is the most words I have heard you say at one time," Abigail said. He looked at her sideways. "Don't make it harder than it already is." She almost smiled. Then she did smile, the full, unguarded one that she usually kept behind the controlled expression, the one he had been catching glimpses of for 3 weeks. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's not a no." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." Harrison moved on a Sunday. Not through the courts. Not through intermediaries. Not through carefully worded petitions, or manipulated freight contracts, or the patient legal architecture he had spent 4 years constructing. He sent 6 men. They came after midnight when the house was dark and the ranch hands were in the bunkhouse, and the only sounds were the horses moving in the barn and the wind off the grassland. Callum heard them first. How was sleeping light? He always did. Nathan had noticed, and the sound of horses on the drive at that hour brought him awake and out of the bunkhouse before any of the other hands stirred. He made it to the main house in time to hammer twice on Nathan's door. Nathan was up and dressed in under a minute. He came out of his room and nearly ran into Abigail in the hallway. She was already up, already dressed, which meant she had been sleeping as lightly as he had, which meant she had known this was coming in the same wordless, bone-deep way he had. "How many?" she said. Callum doesn't know. He heard horses. Nathan was already moving toward the front of the house. Get the documents. She went for the office without being told twice. The next 4 minutes were the longest. Nathan Cole had experienced since the night his father's fever broke wrong. He could hear Callum outside organizing the 2 hands he'd managed to wake. There were 4 total on property tonight, not enough if Harrison had sent serious numbers. He could hear the horses on the drive, multiple sets of hooves moving deliberately. He positioned himself at the front window and watched the dark yard. Abigail came back from the office with the document case and Samuel's leather briefcase both. The summary and the original filing, she said. And Samuel's copies. Where is Samuel? I knocked. He's awake. I told him to stay in his room. Nathan looked at her. She was standing in the hallway of his house in the dark, with 4 years' worth of evidence in her arms, and her jaw set in the particular way it got when she had decided she was not going to be moved, and he had a sudden fierce specific sense of how wrong it would be to let any harm come to her here, in this house, on this land. Put those in the hearth room, he said. Behind the chimney stack. Stay there. Nathan. Abigail. He looked at her directly. I need to be out there, and I cannot be out there, and also wondering where you are. Please. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then she went to the hearth room. He went outside. 6 men. Hector had been right about the riders on the North Ridge. These were the same men or similar professionals. By the way they moved, spreading across the yard in a pattern that suggested they had done this kind of thing before. The one in front. Older with a flat authority in the way he sat. His horse looked at Nathan in the yard and at the 3 ranch hands positioned behind him and did a fast calculation. Cole, he said. You're on private property, Nathan said. Mr. Harrison sent us to collect documents that are the legal property of Harrison Commercial Interests. The man's voice was even. Not angry, not apologetic. The tone of someone executing a business transaction. We're not here for trouble. You rode in after midnight, Nathan said. That's not a business call. Hand over the financial records and we'll leave. No. The man looked at him. The yard was very still. 6 men and 3 ranch hands, and Nathan in between, and somewhere in the house. The thing Harrison had been trying to steal for 4 years, documented and irrefutable, wrapped in leather and hidden behind a chimney stack. Cole, the man said with slightly less evenness than before, be smart about this. I'm being plenty smart, Nathan said. I know who sent you, I know why you're here, and I know that if you take anything from this property by force, you are moving from civil fraud into criminal territory that your employer will not be able to talk his way out of. He held the man's gaze. Is that the job Harrison actually sent you to do? The man was quiet. Because if he told you to come here and collect papers, Nathan continued, he did not tell you that those papers include documentation of his own crimes, and that a territorial lawyer is currently sleeping in my guest room, and that your being here tonight will be testified to in court by every person on this property. He let that land. So I'll ask you again. Is this the job he sent you to do? The front man glanced to his left, then to his right. The calculation was happening in real time. Nathan could see it. The arithmetic of risk versus reward, shifting as the situation failed to match what they'd been told to expect. Then the sound came from inside the house. Not a crash, not a scream. The specific sound of something wooden breaking sharp, deliberate, and then silence. Nathan's blood went cold. He moved before he thought about it, turning back toward the house, which was the wrong instinct, and he knew it. Even as he did it, turning your back on 6 men was not tactically sound, but Abigail was in that house, and the sound had come from inside, and every other consideration became irrelevant. He heard Callum behind him yell something. He heard horses move. He went through the front door at a run. The hearth room. He got there in 4 seconds. The window. The one he had told himself didn't matter, because it faced the interior yard and not the road had been forced. A 7th man. Harrison had sent a 7th man around the back, while the other 6 held Nathan's attention in the front yard. The man was in the room. He had Abigail by the arm. He had the document case in his other hand. Abigail had her free hand locked around the handle of the case, and was not letting go, which was why the man had not already left. The way he came, she was simply refusing with the full physical stubbornness of a woman who was considerably larger than she appeared and had apparently decided that the document case was not leaving her hand. "Let go," the man said, and his voice had the edge of someone who had not expected resistance. "No," Abigail said. Nathan crossed the room in 3 steps. What happened next was not complicated. Nathan Cole had grown up working a cattle ranch, which meant 34 years of physical labor had built into him a specific and practical kind of strength, and the man who had hold of Abigail's arm discovered this very quickly and in a manner that involved the wall. The document case dropped. Abigail caught it before it hit the floor. Nathan looked at the man on the floor who was reconsidering several life choices, and then looked at Abigail. She was breathing hard. Her arm where the man had grabbed her, she was holding it slightly, the instinctive self-protective gesture of someone who has been hurt and is managing it. Her eyes were bright, and her jaw was set, and the document case was against her chest with both arms around it. "Are you hurt?" Nathan said. "I'm fine." "Abigail." "I am fine," she said. "He has the document case. That was the objective. I did not let him have it." Nathan looked at her, at the way she was holding her arm, at the controlled brightness in her eyes that he was beginning to recognize was what her fear looked like when she refused to let it show. "You could have let it go," he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "The documents can be replaced. You cannot." She looked at him. Something moved behind her eyes. Something that was not the careful, measured calculation she usually deployed, but more immediate and more unguarded than that. "They cannot be replaced quickly enough," she said. "If he took them tonight, Harrison would have had them destroyed by morning. Then we would have rebuilt Nathan." She said his name the way she said it when she needed him to stop and listen. He stopped. "I knew what I was doing. I made the choice. And it worked." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then, with a deliberateness that surprised both of them, he reached out and put his hand over hers, the one holding the document case, the one that was shaking slightly, despite everything she was doing to prevent it, and held it there until he felt the shaking ease. She looked down at his hand. He didn't move it. Outside, the sounds of the yard were changing. Hector's voice, loud and authoritative, the sound of horses being repositioned. The particular quality of noise that meant the situation was being controlled rather than escalating. Callum and the other hands had held the 6 men in the yard, while Nathan handled the 7th, and now the whole careful machinery of Harrison's midnight plan was coming apart in the way of things that depend on surprise and find none. The man on the floor of the hearth room made a slow decision to get up. He was permitted to do so. He went out the window the same way he came in, somewhat faster. Nathan heard the front man's voice from outside clipped, redirected the sound of someone terminating an unsuccessful operation. The sound of horses leaving. Hooves on the drive diminishing. Then Hector's voice at the front door. "Nathan, they're gone." Nathan did not immediately move. I was standing in this hearth room in the dark, with his hand over Abigail's, and she was standing closer than she usually stood, because the room was small, and the situation had pushed them together, and neither of them had moved back, and the document case was between them, and outside his ranch hands were regrouping, and somewhere in the guest room, Samuel Harding was presumably having an extremely eventful night. "Nathan," Hector called again. "1 minute," he called back. He looked at Abigail. She was looking up at him with an expression he had not seen on her face before, not the controlled neutrality, not the careful assessment, not the focused competence. Something underneath all of that. Something that had been there a long time, and was only visible now in the dark, after the kind of thing that strips away the management. "I told you he'd move before Monday," she said. Her voice was completely steady. "You did," he said. "We need to get Samuel out of here tonight," she said. "On the road to Helena before dawn. If Harrison knows the filing hasn't happened yet, he may try again." "Yes," Nathan said. Neither of them moved. "We should go tell Samuel," she said. "We should," he agreed. He moved his hand from hers. She held the document case tighter. They went to find Samuel. Samuel Harding was dressed packed and in possession of a remarkable composure for a man who had spent the last 30 minutes listening to what sounded, he said, like a significant property dispute. "I'm riding tonight," he said before either Nathan or Abigail could speak. "There's a quarter moon," Nathan said. "The road to Helena. I have ridden worse roads in worse conditions to file more important documents," Samuel said dryly, "although I admit this particular set of documents is exceptional." He looked at Abigail. "Are you all right?" "Bruised," she said. "Fine." He looked at Nathan, then back at Abigail. Then, with the discretion of a man who had known Abigail Carter since she was 19 years old, and therefore understood certain things, he looked at the wall. "I'll need Hector to ride with me," he said, "for the first stretch." "Done," Nathan said. "When I file," Samuel said, picking up his briefcase. "Harrison will be notified through official channels within 48 hours. After that, any interference with ranch property becomes obstruction of a territorial court proceeding." He looked at Nathan steadily. "You understand what that means?" "It means after Monday," Nathan said. "He can't touch this place without risking prison." "Precisely." Samuel pulled on his coat. "I'll send word when it's done." He went to find Nathan and Abigail were left in the hallway, which was where they had been standing when Callum hammered on the door an hour ago, except that an hour had changed the geography of the space between them in ways neither of them had the immediate vocabulary to describe. Abigail was looking at the document case she was still carrying. Samuel had taken the copies. What she was holding now was the original water rights filing, the actual document, the one with the territorial seal and the 1871 date and the absence of the notification that proved Harrison's amendment was void. "This needs to be somewhere safe," she said, "until Samuel confirms the filing." "I know where," Nathan said. I took her to his father's study, the room he had not gone into often in 4 years. The room with the family Bible and the portrait and the locked box his father had kept in the bottom drawer of the desk. He opened the box with a key he wore on his watch chain, put the document inside, locked it. He held the key for a moment. Then he held it out to Abigail. She looked at it, looked at him. "Nathan, you found it," he said. "You protected it. Did it? You hold it." She took the key from his hand. Her fingers closed around it. She looked down at her closed fist for a moment, and Nathan watched her face do something quiet and private, something he was not going to name out loud because it was hers and she was entitled to it. Then she looked up. "Your father's desk," she said. "The one in the corner." "Yes." She looked at it for a moment. "He was a good man." "The best I knew," Nathan said. She pressed her fist with the key against the front of her dress, against her sternum, the way people hold things that matter. "He would have been glad," she said quietly, "to know someone was still fighting for this." Nathan looked at her in the dark of his father's study, with the key to his father's box in her hand, and his father's work spread around them in the form of a ranch that had survived 4 years of systematic attack because a stranger had stepped off a train and refused to leave. He thought about the platform in Willow Creek, the laughter, her chin going up that fraction of an inch, the suitcase she had lifted herself because nobody else was going to. "He would have been glad about more than that," Nathan said. She looked at him. He held her gaze, and this time there was nothing hidden in it, nothing managed, nothing deployed as protection. Just the plain truth of a man who had spent 4 years in a house alone, and was only now understanding what had been missing from it. She looked away, first not in retreat, but in the way of someone who has received something and needs a moment to make room for it. "Get some sleep," she said. Her voice was not quite steady. "Samuel will send word in 2 days. Abigail, Nathan." She turned back to him, and her eyes were bright in a way that was not fear this time, and not the controlled efficiency she wore like armor. Something more open than that. Something that had been building for 3 weeks and had arrived without announcement in the dark of his father's study at 2 in the morning after a night that had stripped away everything unnecessary. "I know," she said quietly. "I know." He nodded. She went down the hall. He stood in his father's study for a long time, holding the silence and the shape of what had just happened. Then Hector knocked on the front door to say Samuel was ready to ride, and Nathan went to see them off, and the night closed around the ranch, and somewhere inside the locked box in the corner of his father's desk, the key Abigail Carter was holding made all the difference in the world. Samuel's telegram arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 days after he rode out with Hector into the quarter-moon dark. Nathan was at the fence line when Callum came running with it, and he read it standing in the field with the late summer wind cutting across the grass and the cattle moving slow behind him. Filed Monday. Helena Court confirmed receipt. Amendment declared procedurally void pending formal review. Harrison notified per territorial statute. Any interference with Cole property now constitutes criminal obstruction. S. Harding. He read it twice, folded it, put it in his shirt pocket against his chest. Then he walked back to the house to find Abigail. She was in the office. She was always in the office or the kitchen or somewhere between the two, always moving, always doing the next necessary thing. And she looked up when he came in and read his face before he said a word. "It's done," she said. "Filed Monday. Amendment voided pending review." He handed her the telegram. "Samuel says any interference from here forward is criminal obstruction." She read it, set it on the desk, pressed her hand flat against it for a moment, the way she sometimes pressed her hand against the desk when she was containing something she wasn't going to say out loud. "Good," she said finally. Her voice was very quiet. "That's all you have to say?" She looked up. "What would you like me to say?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "Something that sounds like 3 weeks of work and a man grabbing your arm in the dark." She was quiet for a moment. "It isn't finished yet," she said. "The court review. Harrison's response. The overcharging case that still needs to be formally filed. Samuel's work has only just begun. I know that. So it isn't the moment to celebrate." "No," he agreed. "But it's the moment to acknowledge that you did something remarkable." She looked at him with the careful measuring expression she had used on that train platform in Willow Creek, except it was softer now. 3 weeks of shared meals and shared work, and one very long night had worn the edges off it. "We did something remarkable," she said. He didn't argue. But when he left the office, he was almost smiling. Harrison's response came not through the courts, but through the town, which was where it had always been most effective, and where Nathan had always been most vulnerable. The story that spread through Willow Creek in the days following Samuel's filing was specific and carefully constructed, not a wild accusation, but a calibrated one, the kind that carries conviction because it contains just enough verifiable detail to make the false parts feel credible. The story was this. Abigail Carter had arrived in Willow Creek under false pretenses, had insinuated herself into the coal ranch, using a fraudulent marriage contract, had spent 3 weeks going through private financial records that she had no authority to access, had manipulated a vulnerable and isolated man who had been alone too long and didn't know any better, and was now conspiring with an outside lawyer to bring fraudulent charges against one of Willow Creek's most respected businessmen. The word manipulated was doing considerable work in that story. So was vulnerable. Nathan heard it from Hector, who had ridden back from Helena and stopped at the general store and come home with a face like granite. "Whitmore's wife," Hector said. "She's telling it to everyone who comes in. Says she heard it from the banker's wife who heard it from Harrison directly." "Harrison told the banker's wife himself," Nathan said. "Apparently he's not being subtle anymore." Nathan thought about the petition. The marshal at the gate. 6 men in the yard and a 7th through the window. Each escalation more direct than the last. "He's panicking," he said. "Maybe. But panicking men are still dangerous men." Hector looked at him steadily. "How's Miss Carter?" "She doesn't know yet." "She's going to take it hard." "No," Nathan said with more certainty than he expected. "She's going to take it angry." He was right about that. He told her at supper that evening, straight and factual, the way she preferred things without softening or preparation. She listened to all of it without interrupting, which meant she was angry rather than hurt. When something hurt her, she asked questions when she was angry. She went still and collected the information in full before she moved. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Manipulated," she said. "That's the word he's using. He is describing what he did to me and attributing it to me instead. She set down her fork with a precision that was its own kind of violence. He arranged a false marriage contract, put me on a train without telling me I was being used as a weapon, placed me in a situation designed to humiliate both of us, and is now telling the town that I am the manipulator. She looked at Nathan. That is an extraordinary thing to say with a straight face. He has a great deal of practice saying things with a straight face. I want to go to town, she said. Nathan looked at her. Tomorrow, she said. I want to go to the general store and the post office and wherever else people are talking about me, and I want to be seen. She held his gaze. He is using my absence to define me. The less I am seen, the more the story holds. People believe things about people they've never actually spoken to. If I go to town, if I talk to people, it is harder to sustain a fiction about me. It could also go wrong, Nathan said. People might not. Some won't, she said. That's true of everything. She picked up her fork again, not because she was eating, but because she needed something to do with her hands. But some will. And some is enough to begin with. He thought about it for a moment. Then, I'll take you myself. She looked up. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, he said. I want to. She looked at him for a beat. 2. Then she went back to supper. 7 o'clock, she said. I want to be there when the store opens. They drove into Willow Creek the next morning in Nathan's wagon, and the effect of their arrival was immediate and unmistakable. The way conversations paused on the boardwalk. The way eyes followed the wagon from the moment they came down the main street. The way a woman near the dry goods entrance took 2 steps back when she registered who was seated beside Nathan Cole. Abigail registered all of it. She sat with her back straight and her hands in her lap and looked forward, and then she looked at the people looking at her, and she did not look away. They tied up the wagon and went into the general store together. Mrs. Whitmore was behind the counter. She was a tall, angular woman who had been in Willow Creek for 20 years and knew the business of everyone in the surrounding territory with the comprehensive thoroughness of someone who considers information a form of currency. She looked at Abigail and then at Nathan with an expression that was attempting to be neutral and achieving something closer to cornered. Nathan, she said. Mrs. Whitmore. He set a list on the counter. I need these supplies. She looked at the list, didn't pick it up. I've heard some things, she said, and then stopped herself, and then said it anyway, because she was a woman constitutionally unable to leave things unsaid about her. Her name, Abigail said, is Abigail Carter. We have not been introduced. Mrs. Whitmore looked at her directly for what appeared to be the first time. Abigail met her gaze with the full, unhurried patience of someone who was accustomed to being looked at, and had long since decided that being looked at was other people's problem, not hers. What have you heard? Abigail asked. Mrs. Whitmore blinked. She had clearly expected deflection or embarrassment or the kind of flustered retreat that would confirm everything she had been told. What she had not expected was a direct question delivered with complete composure. That you came here under... She paused. That the marriage contract was forged, Abigail said. Yes, it was forged by Victor Harrison, who placed an advertisement in 3 Missouri newspapers designed to find a woman who would answer it, then arranged transportation and legal-looking paperwork, and put me on a train to Montana without informing me that I was being used as a tool to publicly humiliate Mr. Cole. She spoke without heat, without rushing the way she read numbers precisely and completely. I arrived here believing I was answering a legitimate arrangement. Mr. Cole received me knowing the contract was false, and chose, rather than leaving me stranded on that platform in front of a crowd that was laughing at both of us, to bring me to his property and treat me with decency. The store was very quiet. 2 other women who had been examining fabric at the side counter had stopped examining fabric. I subsequently discovered, Abigail continued, that Mr. Harrison has been systematically overcharging the Cole Ranch through manipulated freight contracts for a minimum of 2 years, and that he filed an amendment to the Cole Water Rights Agreement without legally required notification, creating a fraudulent mechanism to seize water rights that affect every farm and ranch in this valley. She looked at Mrs. Whitmore steadily. I documented this. A territorial lawyer filed the evidence with the Helena court on Monday. The amendment has been declared procedurally void. A pause. The overcharging case is pending. Mrs. Whitmore stared at her. The freight contracts, said one of the women at the fabric counter, a farmer's wife named Clara Briggs, whose husband ran a small operation 8 miles east. Harrison's freight contracts, my husband has the same arrangement. Most operations in this valley do, Abigail said. She turned slightly toward Clara. If your husband has kept his invoices for the past 2 years, I would recommend having them reviewed against the original contract rates. She met Clara's eyes. You may find a significant discrepancy. Clara Briggs looked at her for a long moment. Could you? Clara stopped. Started again. Would you be willing to look at them? Our books, I mean. Hal keeps them, but he's not. She glanced at her hands. Numbers aren't his strong point. Bring them to the Cole Ranch, Abigail said. I'll look at them. Nathan, who had been standing beside her through all of this with his arms crossed and his face doing the thing it did when he was trying not to show what he was thinking, looked at her sideways. She did not look back. She looked at Mrs. Whitmore. I'll take Mr. Cole's supplies now, she said, if that's all right. Mrs. Whitmore picked up the list. They were on the boardwalk heading back to the wagon when the second confrontation arrived. Reverend Aldous Pierce came out of the church office across the street and walked toward them with the purposeful step of a man who has been waiting for an opportunity and has identified one. He was 60, silver-haired, and carried the considerable authority of a man whose opinion shaped everything from town council votes to which businesses the church auxiliary patronized. He had not spoken to Nathan Cole in 8 months, which had something to do with a disagreement over the church's position on the Commerce Board hearings that Nathan had never fully explained to anyone. Nathan, he said, then looked at Abigail. Ma'am. Reverend, Nathan said. Pierce looked at Abigail with the expression of a man doing a more careful reassessment than he had expected to need. I've been hearing some things about the situation out at the Cole Ranch, he said. Reverend Pierce, Abigail said. I expect you have been hearing things curated by a man who needs Willow Creek to doubt me before a court case removes the legal cover from his activities. She looked at him directly. I also expect that a man of your position asks himself when he hears a story who benefits from the story being believed. Pierce was quiet for a moment. He was not a stupid man. The long career in a frontier town required a particular kind of intelligence that valued reality over comfort. Harrison's been generous to this church, he said. It was not a defense. It was an honest statement. I know, Abigail said. That makes what I'm saying harder to hear. I understand that. She held his gaze. But the water rights he's been trying to take the Cole River are the same water source that 15 families in this valley depend on for their stock and their crops. If Harrison controls that water, he controls every one of them, including the families in your congregation. She paused. I thought you should know the full shape of what his generosity has been funding. Pierce looked at her for a long moment. You have evidence of this, he said. In a Helena court, she said. Yes. He straightened his coat, looked at Nathan. I owe you an overdue conversation, he said. My door has been open, Nathan said. Pierce nodded and went back across the street. Nathan looked at Abigail. You planned all of that, he said. I planned to come to town and speak to people, she said. The rest was improvisation. She picked up a supply box from the wagon load. We should get back. Clara Briggs is going to bring her books by Friday, and I need to finish the overcharging summary before then. He took the box from her. Abigail. She looked at him. Half this town spent 4 weeks believing a story about you, he said. Yes. And you just spent 20 minutes starting to undo it. I spent 20 minutes telling the truth, she said, which is faster than building a lie. The truth has the advantage of coherence. It holds together when you push on it. She looked at him steadily. The lies Harrison tells eventually contradict each other. I just have to give people enough of the truth to start noticing. He held the box and looked at her and thought about the platform in Willow Creek on the August afternoon she had arrived and the people laughing and her chin going up that fraction of an inch. She had been doing the same thing then that she was doing now. She had been refusing to be defined by other people's stories about her. She had just been doing it quietly, where no one else could see. The twist came from the direction no one expected. It was Hector who brought it on a Thursday afternoon riding back from town, with a face that had moved past tight into something Nathan hadn't seen on it in years, something that looked around the edges like shock. He came directly to the office where Nathan and Abigail were both working through the final overcharging calculations. He stood in the doorway and looked at Abigail. "There's a woman at the telegraph office," he said. "She came in on the noon train. She's been asking for Miss Carter." Abigail looked up. "Who is she?" "Her name's Martha Gaines." Hector paused. "She says she's Harrison's bookkeeper. I should say. She quit yesterday morning." He pulled his hat off. "She says she wants to talk to the woman who's been going through the coal accounts. She says she has information." Nathan and Abigail looked at each other. "Harrison's bookkeeper," Nathan said. "Former," Hector said. "She resigned the day she heard the Helena filing was confirmed. Apparently," he turned his hat in his hands, "apparently she's been keeping her own records, for 2 years, in case she ever needed them." Abigail stood up from the desk. "Bring her here," she said. Martha Gaines was a woman of about 50, with gray at her temples, and the bearing of someone who has spent years making herself small in a room where a loud man was talking. She came into the coal ranch kitchen and sat at the table and folded her hands in front of her, and looked at Abigail with the specific expression of a person who has made a decision at great personal cost and is committed to it, but would very much like someone to confirm they've made the right choice. "Miss Carter," she said. "Mrs. Gaines." Abigail sat across from her. Nathan leaned against the doorframe. "Thank you for coming." "I should have come sooner," Martha Gaines said. "That's the truth of it. I should have come a year ago. 2 years ago." She pressed her folded hands flat on the table. "Mr. Harrison is a man who makes you feel that knowing a thing and acting on it are the same, and that because you haven't acted, it's because you've chosen not to, not because you're frightened." She stopped. "I was frightened." "What changed?" Abigail asked. "He sent men to a ranch in the middle of the night to take documents from a woman working at a desk," Martha Gaines said flatly. "That's what changed. I heard about it. He told the men what had happened, and word got around the office, and he was satisfied about it, the way he talked about it, about you." Her jaw tightened. "I thought about what he would be satisfied about next, and I decided I didn't want to know." She reached into her bag and put a ledger on the table. Abigail looked at it, did not immediately touch it. "What is that?" she said. "His real books," Martha Gaines said. "Not the ones he shows the Commerce Board. Not the ones filed with the county. His actual accounts." She held Abigail's gaze. "Every overcharge, every vendor kickback, every payment made to Commerce Board members for their votes, every dollar he's moved through dummy companies to cover the fraud." A pause. "Dated. Cross-referenced. Witnessed by me with copies stored with my sister in Billings." The kitchen was absolutely silent. Nathan straightened from the doorframe. Abigail put her hand on the ledger. "Mrs. Gaines," she said quietly, "did you understand what this document could do to Victor Harrison?" "Yes," Martha Gaines said. "That is why I brought it." "It could also—" Abigail stopped, chose her words with care. "Your position in this, if it becomes public, he will say you were complicit in what he did, that you kept these records because you were part of it." Martha Gaines looked at her steadily. "I know. Are you prepared for that? I kept those records because I needed proof that what was happening was real," she said. "Because when something wrong happens around you slowly for a long time, you start to question your own judgment. You start to think maybe everyone does this. Maybe this is how business works. Maybe I'm the one who doesn't understand." She looked at Abigail with absolute directness. "You start to feel like the crazy one. And I needed those records to remind myself that I was not." Abigail held her gaze for a long, quiet moment. "I understand that," she said. "More than you might expect." Something shifted in Martha Gaines's expression, a slight loosening around the eyes, the small physical relief of being understood. "Samuel Harding," Abigail said. "Our lawyer in Helena. I'm going to telegraph him tonight. With this document, the case against Harrison moves from civil fraud to criminal fraud. That changes the timeline, the court, and the likely outcome. She looked at Nathan, then back at Martha. Will you testify? Yes, Martha Gaines said. Without hesitation, Nathan pulled a chair out and sat down. He looked at the ledger on the table, and then at the two women across from each other, the one who had documented Harrison's crimes from the outside, and the one who had watched them happen from the inside and understood that the thing Victor Harrison had spent 4 years building had just come apart completely. Mrs. Gaines, he said, I'd like you to stay at the ranch tonight. You'll have a safe room and supper, and tomorrow we'll get that telegram to Samuel. Martha looked at him. Something moved in her face. You don't know me, Mr. Cole. No, he said. But Miss Carter's judgment is the best I've encountered, and she's looking at you the way she looked at those account books the first time she found something real in them. He held the woman's gaze. That's recommendation enough for me. Martha looked at Abigail. Abigail for once had no controlled expression in place at all. What was on her face was simply what was on her face, moved, and trying not to show how much by Nathan's words, and not entirely succeeding. Stay, she said to Martha. There's plenty of room. The telegram to Samuel that night was 4 pages long. Abigail wrote it at the desk in the office with Nathan sitting in the guest chair. His chair now unreservedly, and Martha Gaines at the corner with a cup of tea, watching with the slightly dazed expression of a woman who has made the frightening decision and come out the other side to find the ground solid. When Abigail finished, she read it back. Made 2 corrections. Folded it. This changes the charges, she said. Samuel will need to amend the filing. Is that complicated? Nathan asked. For Samuel, no. She held the folded telegram. For Harrison, yes, considerably. She set it down. Criminal fraud carries different weight than civil fraud. The court is different. The penalties are different. The likelihood of, she paused, the likelihood of him continuing to operate as a free man during the proceedings is significantly reduced. He'll try to run, Nathan said. Possibly. Samuel will have anticipated that. He'll flag it with the territorial marshal in Helena before he amends the filing. She looked at Nathan. Harrison is good at working systems. But this document, she touched Martha's ledger. This is not a procedural argument. This is not an accounting discrepancy. This is his own hand in his own numbers showing exactly what he did and to whom. A pause. Men like Harrison understand legal exposure. He will know when the amended filing lands that this is over. And then, Nathan said. And then, she said, we wait for the court to do its job. She said it with the matter-of-fact steadiness she brought to everything. But Nathan watched her hands while she said it, and he saw what her face was being careful not to show the exhale of 3 weeks of sustained tension, finding somewhere to go. He stood up, took the telegram from the desk. I'll take this to the telegraph office first thing, he said. Thank you, Abigail. He stopped at the door. She looked up. What you did today in town. The way you talked to Whitmore's wife. Pierce. Clara Briggs. He looked at her steadily. That took something most people don't have. She looked at him for a moment. It took practice, she said. Being stared at for 25 years is excellent preparation for not caring who's watching. That's not what I mean, he said. She held his gaze. I know it isn't, she said quietly. He nodded. Went to find Hector to arrange the morning ride. In the office, Martha Gaines looked at the door Nathan had walked through and then at Abigail. He's a good man, Martha said. Yes, Abigail said simply. He is. Samuel's response came 48 hours later. Nathan read it at the kitchen table with Abigail across from him and Martha Gaines beside the window. All 3 of them still in the particular suspended state of people who have done what they could and are waiting on the world to catch up. Amendment filed. Criminal fraud charges accepted by territorial court. Arrest warrant issued for Victor Harrison. Harrison taken into custody in Helena, attempting to board northbound train. Hearing set for September 14th. Your presence required. Abigail's testimony, central to prosecution. All evidence secured. S. Harding. Nathan read the relevant part aloud. Arrest warrant issued for Victor Harrison. Harrison taken into custody and Helena attempting to board northbound train. The kitchen held the words for a moment. Then Martha Gaines put her face in her hands. Not crying. Or maybe crying the kind that doesn't make noise, the kind that comes from 2 years of carrying something alone and suddenly not having to anymore. Abigail put her hand over Martha's on the table and didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that the gesture didn't already cover. Nathan looked at the telegram. At the words about Abigail's testimony being central. At the September 14th, 3 weeks away, and the fact that it was the first fixed point on a calendar that had felt for 4 years like it extended into nothing. September 14th, he said. Abigail looked up. We'll need to go to Helena, both of us. And Mrs. Gaines. Martha lifted her face. Her eyes were red, but her expression was set the face of someone who has arrived at a decision and is at peace with what it cost. I'll testify, she said. I told you I would. I know, Abigail said. She squeezed the woman's hand once, and then let go in the efficient, unsentimental way she offered comfort present and real, and then out of the way, because she understood that people generally prefer to handle their own emotions without an audience once they have been acknowledged. Nathan set the telegram on the table. He looked at Abigail. She looked at him. Somewhere in the space between them was 4 years of his silence and 3 weeks of her presence, and 1 night in a dark room with his hand over hers, and a key pressed against her sternum, and a thing neither of them had yet said that was becoming with each passing day harder to leave unsaid. After the hearing, he said carefully, when all of this is settled. Nathan, she said, I'd like to have a conversation with you, he said. A different kind of conversation than we've been having. She looked at him steadily. The careful expression was there, but it was thinner now, worn down to something more transparent than it had been on that train platform, the natural result of 3 weeks of being seen clearly by someone who was paying close attention. All right, she said. After the hearing. After the hearing, she agreed. Martha Gaines looked between the two of them with the expression of a woman who has been through enough in her life to recognize a significant moment when she sees one, and said nothing and drank her tea. Nathan picked up the telegram and went to find Hector because there were preparations to make, and 3 weeks was not as long as it sounded, and the work, as always, was what kept everything else in its proper order until the right time arrived. But the right time was coming. He could feel it the same way he could feel weather in the grassland, not yet but soon, and moving in the right direction. The road to Helena took 2 days. Nathan drove. Abigail sat beside him. Martha Gaines rode in the back with Hector, the 4 of them moving through the Montana grassland, in the particular silence of people who have said most of what needs to be said, and are now simply moving toward the thing that will decide the rest. On the first evening, they stopped at a way station, a rough building with 3 rooms, and a cook who asked no questions, and ate a supper of salt pork and beans that nobody tasted much of because the food was not the point of the meal. The point of the meal was sitting together in the ordinary way of people who have become, without planning it, something like a unit. Martha Gaines went to bed early. Hector went to check the horses. Nathan and Abigail sat at the way station table with coffee going cold between them and the fire settling in the hearth, and the particular weight of a conversation that had been waiting 3 weeks pressing against the ordinary silence. You're thinking about tomorrow, Nathan said. I'm thinking about the testimony, she said. What Samuel will ask, what Harrison's lawyer will try. She turned her cup. I've been through it in my head 100 times. The documentation is clean. Martha's ledger is unimpeachable. The procedural defect in the amendment is recorded in the territorial statute itself. She paused. I know it's solid. I know all of that. But knowing a thing is solid and standing in a courtroom while a man tries to dismantle it are not the same experience. No, he said. They're not. She looked at him. Have you ever testified in court? Once. Land dispute 12 years ago. He turned his own cup. I was 22, and I thought knowing the truth was enough. That it would be self-evident once you said it out loud. Was it? Eventually, he said. But it took longer than I expected, and there were moments in the middle where I wasn't certain. He held her gaze. You're better prepared than I was. That is a low bar, she said, and almost smiled. "It is," he agreed. "But you're better prepared than most." She was quiet for a moment. "Nathan." "Yeah." "That conversation you said you wanted to have," she said carefully. "After the hearing." He looked at her. "I'd like to have it now," she said. "Before. Because if something goes wrong tomorrow, if the testimony doesn't land the way Samuel expects, if Harrison's lawyer finds something I haven't anticipated, I don't want." She stopped. "I don't want it to be a thing I meant to say, and didn't." Nathan set his cup down. "All right," he said. She looked at the table for a moment, then at him. The careful expression, the one she had been wearing that first day on the platform, the one she had worn for 3 weeks while she dismantled Harrison's fraud and managed a ranch kitchen and held a document case with both arms while a man grabbed her in the dark, was gone. What was in its place was simply Abigail without the armor. "I came here without a home," she said. "I have been without a real home since my father's farm was sold, and I told myself that was acceptable, that a woman with a skill and a willingness to work could make her way without one, that needing a home was a weakness." She looked at him steadily. "I was wrong about that. Abigail." "Let me finish," she said. "Please." He was quiet. "Your ranch," she said, "is the first place in 4 years where I have woken up in the morning knowing that what I did that day would matter to someone other than myself. And I understand that I arrived under false pretenses, and that what has happened between us has not been ordinary. And I understand that you are a man who takes a long time to trust anyone, and who has very good reasons for that." She held his gaze. "But I need you to know that whatever the hearing brings, whatever happens in that courtroom tomorrow, I am not leaving because the reason I came is resolved. I am only leaving if you ask me to." The fire settled. Outside the way station, the Montana night was wide and cold and full of stars. Nathan looked at Abigail Carter, at the woman who had arrived on a train platform with a battered suitcase and $12 worth of luggage, and the chin of someone who had decided a long time ago that other people's cruelty was not going to be the thing that broke her, and felt the full weight of what she had just said and what it had cost her to say it. "I'm not going to ask you to leave," he said. She held his gaze. "That isn't the same as asking me to stay." "No," he said. "It isn't." He leaned forward, both arms on the table, and looked at her directly in the way he had been doing more of lately, the way that didn't manage anything, that didn't keep a careful distance. "Abigail, I'm asking you to stay." She looked at him for a long, steady moment. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. They finished their coffee, went to their separate rooms, slept or tried to with the hearing a morning away, and something newly named between them, taking up exactly the right amount of space. The Helena Courthouse was a substantial building that smelled of wood polish and old paper, and the accumulated authority of a territory becoming a state. Samuel Harding met them on the steps with his briefcase and his wire spectacles, and the expression of a man who has reviewed his case so many times, he has achieved a kind of calm that looks from the outside like indifference. "How are you?" he asked Abigail. "Ready," she said. He looked at her for a moment, with the appraisal of someone who had known her for 6 years and understood the difference between her saying she was fine and her meaning it. He appeared to conclude that she meant it. "The defense will challenge your authority to access the documents," he said. "I expect them to argue that you acted as an agent of Nathan Cole without formal legal standing, which they'll use to question the chain of custody." "I was engaged as a ranch accounts manager," Abigail said. I have the engagement letter, yes. It's thin verbal agreement, nothing formal." He held up a hand before she could respond. "It will hold, but be prepared for that line of questioning." He looked at Nathan. "They'll also try to characterize the midnight incident as a lawful document retrieval that was violently resisted." Nathan's jaw tightened. "He sent 7 men. I know. Callum and 2 other hands have given statements. Hector will testify." Samuel adjusted his spectacles. "The truth is on our side. That is not always enough, but today I believe it will be." He led them inside. Victor Harrison was already in the courtroom. Abigail had not seen him since the day she had stood in the yard while his men came to the gate with their legal-sounding threats. She saw him now across the courtroom, older than she had imagined from Nathan's descriptions, heavier, with the well-maintained appearance of a man who has spent years around enough money for it to have settled into his bearing like something permanent. He looked at her when she came in. She looked back at him. She did not look away first. He did. It was a small thing. It meant nothing legally. But Abigail felt it in her spine, the specific satisfaction of a woman who has been defined by someone else's story about her and has survived long enough to stand in the same room as the person who told it and be unafraid. Nathan beside her felt her straighten and understood what had happened without being told. He put his hand briefly at the small of her back there, and then gone the lightest possible contact, the kind that says "I see you" without demanding a response, and then moved to take his seat beside Samuel. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Harrison's lawyer was good. He was methodical and calm, and he worked the chain of custody argument, the way Samuel had predicted, challenging Abigail's standing, questioning the circumstances of document access, suggesting that what she had done in Nathan's office was a form of trespass dressed up as helpfulness. Abigail took the stand at 11 o'clock. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight and her voice level, and she answered every question the way she did everything, completely and precisely, without embellishment, without retreat. Miss Carter, Harrison's lawyer said, "You arrived at the Cole Ranch under what has been described as a fraudulent marriage contract. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And yet you stayed?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because Mr. Cole asked me to stay to assist with ranch accounts," she said. "Because I had the skills to do it. And because the fraudulent contract that brought me there had been arranged by your client, not by Mr. Cole or by me. And I saw no reason to leave, simply because a deception had been practiced on us both." The lawyer paused. It was a brief pause, professional, controlled, but Abigail caught it and noted it the way she noted discrepancies in a ledger. "You reviewed financial documents you were not formally authorized to access," he said. "I was engaged by Mr. Cole to manage ranch accounts," she said. "He showed me the office. He gave me access to the materials. That is authorization." "A verbal arrangement?" "Yes. The same kind of verbal arrangement by which every ranch hand in Montana Territory is employed every morning." She held the lawyer's gaze. "Are you arguing that verbal employment agreements are not binding? Because I expect that would be of considerable interest to most of the working population of this territory." A sound moved through the courtroom. Not quite laughter, something more restrained than that, the sound of a room full of people registering a point. The judge's expression did not change, but he did not reach for his gavel. Harrison's lawyer moved on. He asked about the night of the raid, calling it carefully an attempted document retrieval, and Abigail described what had happened with the same flat precision she brought to everything. The window, the man, her arm, the document case. "You physically resisted," the lawyer said. "I held on to documents that belonged to Nathan Cole," she said, "in his house, while a man who had entered through a forced window was attempting to remove them." She looked at the lawyer steadily. "If that constitutes resistance, I would do it again." Another sound from the courtroom, larger this time. The judge's gavel came down, not harshly, almost as a formality. Martha Gaines testified at 1 o'clock. She sat in the witness stand with her hands in her lap and told the truth in the straight, tired voice of a woman who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and is finally setting it down. She described the double books, the vendor kickbacks, the Commerce Board payments, the careful architecture of a fraud that had been running for 6 years across a dozen operations in the valley, not just the Cole Ranch. Harrison's lawyer cross-examined her for 40 minutes and made no meaningful headway because the ledger was the ledger, and the dates were the dates, and Martha Gaines had spent 2 years watching herself be complicit in something she knew was wrong, and had kept records of every moment of it with the meticulous care of a woman who was not going to be gaslit about her own memory. When she stepped down, she looked at Abigail across the courtroom. Abigail nodded once. Martha sat down. The judge recessed for an hour. They sat in the hallway outside the courtroom. Nathan, Abigail, Samuel, Martha, Hector, in the particular suspended state of people who have done every possible thing and are now in the hands of something larger than themselves. Hector brought water from the end of the hall. Nobody talked much. At one point, Nathan looked at Abigail and said quietly, "You were remarkable in there." "I told the truth," she said, in an organized fashion. "That's not Nathan." She looked at him. "If you want to compliment me, do it after we know." He almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him sideways when he said that the ma'am, which he used so rarely and only in the particular tone that meant he was being deliberate about it, and something moved in her face that she did not try to manage. Samuel came back from a conversation with the court clerk and sat beside them. "The judge reviewed the amendment filing against the notification statute," he said. "The clerk confirmed there is no delivery record for the required notification. The judge has asked Harrison's lawyer to provide any documentation of notification within the recess period." He folded his hands. "Harrison's lawyer requested 2 weeks. Was he given them?" Nathan said. "No," Samuel said. "He was given the hour." The hour passed. Harrison's lawyer did not produce documentation of notification. Because there was none. Because it had never been sent. Because Victor Harrison, 4 years ago, in the careful construction of his plan, had assumed that a grieving son, newly in possession of a dead father's ranch, would not read old filings carefully enough to notice the gap. He had been right about that. He had been wrong about everything else. The judge returned to the bench at 3 o'clock. He reviewed the evidence for 11 minutes. Nathan counted. Then he spoke. The amendment to the Coal Water Rights Agreement filed November 14, 1879, was declared void for procedural non-compliance. The water rights reverted to sole coal ownership in full, with no further Commerce Board review authority. The criminal fraud charges against Victor Harrison, incorporating the overcharging evidence, the double ledger documentation provided by Martha Gaines, and the evidence of Commerce Board vote manipulation, were confirmed and referred to the territorial prosecutor for trial. Harrison's assets were frozen pending proceedings. His bail was set at a number that suggested the court had formed a clear opinion. Harrison across the courtroom looked at the judge, then at the table in front of him, then for one moment at Abigail. She met his gaze. He looked away. It was the same movement as that morning, but different in weight. In the morning, it had been calculation, the reassessment of a man who had not expected this opponent and was revising his strategy. Now it was something else. The look of a man who has finally understood that the person he dismissed as a pawn was in fact the one who ended the game. On the courthouse steps, in the late September afternoon light, Samuel shook everyone's hand with the satisfied efficiency of a man closing a successful file and immediately beginning to think about the next one. "The overcharging civil case will proceed separately," he said. "I'll be in contact. Nathan, the court will send formal documentation of the water rights restoration within 30 days. He looked at Abigail. "Your testimony was definitive. The judge's questions during the recess were specifically about your accounting analysis. It was that work more than anything else that made the fraud unambiguous." "Martha's ledger made it unambiguous," Abigail said. "Martha's ledger corroborated it," Samuel said. "Your analysis built the framework that made the ledger comprehensible." He held her gaze briefly. "Accept the credit, Abigail. You earned it." He left. He always left quickly. There was always somewhere Samuel Harding needed to be. Martha Gaines stood on the steps with her coat around her shoulders and the expression of a woman who has laid down a burden and is discovering that her shoulders work differently without it. "What will you do?" Abigail asked her. "I have a sister in Billings," she said. "I told you." She looked at Abigail. "She's been asking me to come for 2 years. I think I'll go." A pause. "I think I'm done being afraid of making the right choice." Abigail reached out and took the woman's hand, held it for a moment. "Thank you," she said, "for coming to us, for testifying, for all of it." Martha squeezed her hand. "Thank you for being the kind of person worth coming to," she said. She went with Hector to find the wagon. Nathan and Abigail were left on the courthouse steps with Helena moving around them in its ordinary afternoon business, entirely indifferent to the fact that something significant had just happened inside that building. Nathan looked at the street, looked at Abigail. "It's done," he said. "The criminal case is just beginning," she said. The civil case will take months. The water rights restoration is 30 days of paperwork. She paused. But yes, the part that could have gone wrong didn't go wrong, so yes, it's done. He turned to face her fully, which he had learned was the way to have a real conversation with her. Not sideways, not with one eye on the middle distance, but directly the way she had looked at every problem she had ever solved. "You said last night," he began. "I remember what I said last night. I want to make sure you meant it the way I understood it." She looked at him steadily. The September light was warm, and the street was loud, and they were standing in front of a courthouse in Helena, Montana, which was not where either of them had expected to be having this conversation. But they were having it here, because that was where the rest of things had led them. "I meant that I want to stay," she said. "At the ranch, with you. In whatever capacity that—" She stopped. "Nathan, I am not good at—" "Neither am I," he said. "Then we are well matched," she said. "We are," he said. He reached out and took her hand, the way he had taken it in the dark of the hearthroom, fully deliberately, with the specific intention of a man who has decided something and is done being cautious about it. She looked down at their hands and then up at his face. "I'm going to ask you something," he said. "All right. What I'm asking isn't because you saved my ranch," he said. "And it isn't because you're the best person I've found for the books, or because the kitchen has been different since you got here, or because of what you did in that courtroom today." He held her gaze. "It's because of the platform in Willow Creek. It's because you picked up your own suitcase, and I watched you decide not to let them break you, and I thought even then in that first minute, that was the most remarkable thing I had ever seen a person do." Abigail was very still. "And everything since then," he said, "has only confirmed it." She looked at him. Her eyes were bright in the way that was not fear, and not the controlled efficiency she wore like armor. The way he had seen once or twice in unguarded moments, full and unmanaged, and entirely hers. "Nathan Cole," she said, "are you asking me to marry you on the steps of a courthouse?" "I'm asking you to come home," he said, "and to stay. And if you're willing, yes. I'm asking that too." She was quiet for a long moment. "I came to Montana looking for a home," she said quietly. "I thought it would be an arrangement. Something practical and functional and decent." She looked at their joined hands. "I did not expect to find someone who saw me clearly from the first minute and chose in spite of everything to keep looking." Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not. "Yes," she said. "I'm willing." He held her hand tighter. She held his back. They stood on the steps of the Helena courthouse in the September light, and did not say anything more because there was nothing more that needed saying. They were married 3 weeks later. Not a large ceremony. Nathan was not a man for large ceremonies, and Abigail had spent enough of her life being looked at by crowds to have no particular appetite for engineering another one. Reverend Pierce, who had ridden out to the Cole Ranch the week after the Helena hearing to have that overdue conversation with Nathan, and had stayed for supper and left 3 hours later, with a more complicated understanding of Victor Harrison's generosity, performed the ceremony on the porch. Hector stood beside Nathan. Clara Briggs, whose husband's freight accounts Abigail had reviewed, and whose discrepancy when documented turned out to be over $300, stood beside Abigail. Martha Gaines had come down from Billings for the week. Samuel Harding sent a telegram that was one sentence about time. S. Harding. Callum cried, which he would have denied if anyone had mentioned it. Abigail wore a dress the color of dark green prairie grass that she had made herself in the 2 weeks between Helena and the wedding, sitting at the kitchen table in the evenings with the fabric and her needle, while Nathan read at the hearth, and they moved around each other in the easy, intimate rhythm of two people who have been sharing a house long enough to stop noticing that they're doing it. When Reverend Pierce asked Nathan if he took Abigail Carter to be his wife, Nathan said, "I do." The way he said, everything important, without preamble, without decoration, with the full weight of a man who does not say things he does not mean. When he asked Abigail if she took Nathan Cole, she looked at the man who had lifted her suitcase from her hands on a train platform in August, and driven her away from a crowd that was still laughing, and said yes, the same way she had said it on the courthouse steps, with her eyes bright, and her voice steady, and her hands completely still. Pierce pronounced them married. Hector started clapping. Callum joined in. Clara Briggs made a noise that was indistinguishable from the noise she made when her youngest daughter lost a tooth, which was her standard response to things that moved her. Nathan looked at Abigail. She looked at him. He lifted her hand and pressed his mouth to the back of it. The old formal gesture made entirely real by the way he looked at her while he did it, not at the hand at her face. She laughed. The full, unguarded version. The one he had been collecting glimpses of since the office in the first week that she kept behind the armor of her composure. It came freely now, easily, like something that had been waiting a long time for permission. 6 months later, in the early spring, the criminal trial of Victor Harrison concluded with a conviction on 11 counts of fraud, 2 counts of criminal conspiracy, and 1 count of property theft. He was sentenced to 7 years. His assets, when liquidated to settle civil claims, covered the overcharging restitution to the coal ranch and 12 other operations in the valley, including the Briggs farm. The water rights to the Coal River remained as they had always been, solely with the Coal family. The valley that had depended on that water, the farms, the smaller ranches, the families trying to build something permanent in Montana territory, continued to depend on it. And the people who depended on it knew now the full story of what had nearly happened, how close it had come, what it had taken to prevent it. In Willow Creek, the story of Abigail Carter changed. Not overnight. These things never happen overnight, but in the way of true things that have been given enough time and enough evidence, gradually, irreversibly, and then all at once. Mrs. Whitmore told the story to anyone who came into the general store with the cheerful revisionism of a woman who had decided that her own role in it had been one of appropriate skepticism rather than cruelty, and that what mattered was where things ended up. She was not wrong about the second part. Clara Briggs organized a valley-wide meeting about freight contract reviews, for which Abigail provided the accounting framework. 9 families found discrepancies. The total recovery was almost $4,000. Reverend Pierce preached a sermon in October that did not name names, but was understood by everyone who heard it as being about the specific kind of cruelty that consists of deciding at first glance that a person is less than they are. He preached it well. Several people cried. One of them was Mrs. Whitmore, which she also would have denied if anyone mentioned it. On a Thursday evening in May, 6 months after the wedding, Nathan and Abigail sat on the porch of the Coal Ranch in the last of the light. The fields were green. The cattle were settled in the east pasture. The river caught the evening light in the south the way it always did, the way it had when Nathan's father ran this land, and his father before him. The sound of it carried on the warm air, steady, unhurried, entirely indifferent to the human drama that had been conducted in its name. Abigail had a cup of tea. Nathan had coffee. Between them on the porch rail was a letter from Samuel Harding, confirming the final dissolution of Harrison's commercial interests in the valley. "It's really done now," Abigail said. "Yeah," Nathan said. They were quiet for a while. The good kind of quiet, the kind that had nothing uncomfortable in it, that was simply the sound of 2 people who had earned their peace sitting inside it. "Do you know what I thought," Nathan said, "when I saw you on that platform?" "You thought I was part of Harrison's scheme," she said. "Before that," he said. "In the first second, before I knew anything." She looked at him. "I thought," he said, "that whoever sent that telegram about a bride had made a serious error in judgment because the woman standing there was not going to be anyone's pawn. She was too—" he looked for the word, too solid, too real, too entirely herself. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "And I thought whoever this woman is, she deserves better than what's about to happen to her." Abigail was quiet for a moment. "And then you picked up my suitcase. And then I picked up your suitcase," he said. She looked at the fields, at the river, at the land that had been fought for and saved, and that would, God willing, be here long after both of them. "Nathan," she said. "Yeah. You said that morning, the first morning I worked in your office, that you were not your wife's husband." She smiled slightly. "You were very clear about that." "I was," he said. "It seems that position has changed." "It has," he said. She turned and looked at him fully, with the eyes that had read 4 years of fraud out of an account book and testified to it in a courtroom, and watched a man who had spent 4 years alone slowly remember what it was to let someone matter to him. "I came to Montana without a home," she said. "I told you that on the road to Helena." "You did. I was wrong," she said. "I came to Montana to find a home, and I found one." She looked at the barn, the pasture, the cottonwood trees, the house where the kitchen smelled like bread, and the office smelled like ink, and the east room that had become her room, and then their room, and was now simply the room where she woke up every morning to the sound of a man who had been worth every mile of the journey. "It just didn't look the way I expected." Nathan reached out and covered her hand with his, the same gesture as the dark room, the same deliberateness, and held it there in the warm May evening, while the river ran through the south pasture and the light faded over the Montana grassland. "No," he said. "I expect it didn't." She turned her hand over and held his back. The woman everyone had laughed at on the platform in Willow Creek was sitting on the porch of her own home on land that had been saved by her work and her courage, and her absolute refusal to be less than she was, beside a man who had known what she was worth from the moment he watched her lift her own suitcase because nobody else was going to. The town had called her unsuitable. The town had been wrong, and the river ran, and the fields were green, and the life they had built out of false contracts and account books, and one long dangerous night and 2 days on a courthouse road was solid and real and entirely theirs. Some people come into your life dressed as a mistake. They arrive at the wrong time, through the wrong door, under the wrong circumstances, carrying the wrong paperwork. They are not what you expected. They are not what anyone told you to expect. They do not fit the shape of the life you had planned. And they are precisely because of all of that exactly what you needed. Nathan Cole had known it on a train platform in August, in the space of 1 second, watching a woman decide not to cry in front of people who were laughing at her. It had taken the rest of it, the weeks, the work, the danger, the courtroom, the courthouse steps for him to say it out loud. But he had known. And Abigail Carter, who had spent 25 years being told she was not enough, not small enough, not quiet enough, not the right shape for the life other people had imagined for her, had come to a ranch in Montana and found that she was in fact exactly enough. More than enough. She was the kind of woman who saves a man's life and calls it bookkeeping. The kind who holds a document case with both arms while her heart is hammering and calls it practicality. The kind who stands on a courthouse step in the September light and says yes to the rest of her life with her eyes steady and her hands still. That is not a woman who was sent as a punishment. That is a woman who was sent as a gift by whatever force arranges these things to a man who had forgotten he was allowed to receive one. And the life they built together on that land beside that river in that house where the kitchen smelled like bread and the hearth burned warm against Montana winters was proof that the people who get laughed at on the platform sometimes turn out to be the ones who change everything. Every time.